first item of business is general questions. Question 1 has not been lodged. Question 2, Laura Moodie.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken through the education system to support the local delivery of measures to prevent and eradicate violence against women and girls, in light of COSLA's recent white paper, Strengthening Local Delivery to Prevent and Eradicate Violence Against Women and Girls.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallan.
Presiding Officer, eradicating violence against women and girls fundamentally requires men to change their behaviour. However, our education system can play an important part in that. Our Equally Safe Delivery Plan, for example, sets out a number of actions that we're taking. Education actions include supporting Equally Safe at School, which is a whole-school approach developed by Rape Crisis Scotland and Zero Tolerance, publishing schools guidance with the Gender-Based Violence in Schools Working Group, and funding the Digital Discourse Initiative. But beyond Equally Safe, actions like the Government's confirmation that we will bring forward legislation to end the use of mobile phones in the learning environment, I believe these can make a difference by separating young people from what is often misogynistic content online.
Laura Moodie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In February this year, the Scottish Government introduced new relationships, sexual health and parenthood guidance, which for the first time includes the importance of teaching consent. What will the Cabinet Secretary do to ensure every school is rolling out this guidance to reflect the issues young people, particularly young girls, are sharing about their experiences in school?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Ms Moodie for raising this question and that particular issue of relationships and sexual health and parenthood education, which is an integral part of the health and wellbeing area of the school curriculum in Scotland. The RSHP education, it focuses on equipping children and young people with the knowledge, skills and values to make informed and positive choices about forming relationships. One vitally important part of that, of course, is consent, which Ms Moodie is absolutely right to mention. And as Education Secretary, I'll continue to work with school leaders and local authorities across Scotland to make sure that that's being fulsomely taught.
Question 3 has not been lodged. Question 4, Daniel Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what its current estimates are for the cost and timescale required to complete the remaining sections of the A9 dualling programme that are still to be upgraded.
Minister Tom Arthur.
The Scottish Government remains committed to dualling the A9 between Perth and Inverness by 2035. The programme is estimated to cost £3.97 billion at April 2025 prices. When adjusted for inflation, this is broadly similar to the £3.7 billion at April 2023 prices reported in December 2023 and below the original estimate of £3 billion at 2008 prices. The 2026 delivery plan will see the proportion of dual carriageway between Perth and Inverness increase to 50% by the end of 2030, 67% by the end of 2032, 91% by the end of 2034 and 100% by the end of 2035.
Daniel Johnson.
The latest tenders are clearly welcome, giving some clarity about the completion of the A9, albeit some 28 years after it was originally promised. But I think the costs do require some examination. On a per kilometre basis, the latest sections will come in at around £20 million per kilometre. That compares to £6.4 million per kilometre, adjusted for inflation, for the Kincraig to Dilradie section. And on an international basis, the Faroese government built tunnels for £10 million per kilometre. That's new roads under the sea. So does the Minister agree with me that it is vitally important that we have cost-effective delivery of infrastructure for economic growth? And what lessons is the Scottish Government seeking to learn from international best practice, such as the Faroese example?
Minister.
The Scottish Government is, of course, always open to learning from best practice internationally, but the member is absolutely right to highlight the importance of cost effectiveness. This also has to be balanced with ensuring that the project can be delivered in a way that is cognisant of market capacity and ensures the minimum amount of disruption for road users as well. And creating that balance is what is reflected in the process that the Scottish Government has undertaken.
Supplementary, Willie Rennie.
There is some concern that the contracts won't deliver significant community benefit and supply chain benefits too. So can the Minister set out what work has been done and what lessons have been learnt from the likes of the Lower Thames Crossing, where they've got good examples of just that?
Minister.
Well, as I hope the member would recognise, the framework under which procurement is governed within this country is one which was certainly very much ahead of its time, and it still stands the test of time on issues such as community benefit and ensuring a significant investment of public money delivers lasting benefits beyond the infrastructure that is, of course, the central focus and concern. We, of course, now have procurement of the framework underway. That was launched by the Cabinet Secretary earlier this month, and that, of course, will set out the broad provisions as we move towards the completion of the A9 over the next 9 years.
Question 5, David Barrett.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what the next steps are towards delivering a direct ferry service between Rosyth and mainland Europe.
Minister Tom Arthur.
Whilst the Scottish Government is supportive of direct ferry services to Europe, the decision to introduce an international ferry service, including the timing, is a consideration for the commercial ferry operator and relevant port authorities. The Scottish Government has received an application for funding through the Waterborne Freight Grant Scheme, which is currently being assessed. The Scottish Government also amended the minimum requirements for the location of a border control post through the Official Controls Location of Border Control Post Scotland Regulations 2026. This amendment provides flexibility for border control post requirements within green freeport zones.
David Barrett.
I thank the Minister for his response. In order for Forth Ports and DFDS to progress this route, they require clarity on the Waterborne Freight Scheme, and they require clarity on a £3 million manifesto commitment. Funding from the UK Government has been strictly ring-fenced. Can a Minister confirm timescales for each funding stream? And will the Scottish Government constructively work with Forth Ports to ensure funding is not unduly restricted?
Minister.
Well, I want to assure the member that we greatly value the interest shown from business in the Government's commitment to support the funding of ferry services from Scotland to Europe. And I think this is particularly timely as we approach the 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum, which has led to such significant economic harm for Scotland and indeed the wider UK. And it is my hope that by strengthening our connectivity with European neighbours, we will be able to renew our relationships again. In terms of the question posed, I would want to confirm to the member that work is continuing to assess the various options available to deliver this funding, and we will work constructively with all interested parties regarding the introduction of an international ferry service.
Thank you. Question 6 is not lodged. Question 7, Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the timeline for the delivery of a medium-term solution to the A83 Rest and Be Thankful.
Minister Tom Arthur.
The Scottish Government is delivering a range of measures in the short, medium and long term to reduce the risk of impact of landslides on the A83 at the Rest and Be Thankful. Following the publication of draft orders, Transport Scotland continues to progress the proposed medium-term solution through the statutory authorisation process. Construction of the medium-term solution can only commence if approved under the relevant statutory authorisation process, and thereafter a timetable for construction can be determined.
Jenny Minto.
I thank the Minister for his response. As the Minister may be aware, I organised a series of round tables in September with local businesses, the community and national businesses. Concerns were raised about the use of the old military road for the duration of the construction period of the long-term solution, and believe it would also be hugely detrimental to the economy of Argyll and Bute and also the communities. The Minister will appreciate these concerns given his portfolio, so I hope he will support me in asking that the Cabinet Secretary meets with the Rest and Be Thankful campaign group to discuss their proposals and understand their reasoning behind them for the medium-term option.
Minister.
Well, can I thank Jenny Minto for her question and recognise the amount of work that she has undertaken to represent the interests of her constituents on the Rest and Be Thankful, and I thank her for raising awareness of these specific concerns. I am aware that the Cabinet Secretary has received correspondence from the campaign group which outlines their views on a permanent solution to the landslip challenges at the Rest and Be Thankful. I would like to reassure the member and Parliament that the Government will carefully consider this correspondence and is committed to building on the positive engagement undertaken to date with the campaign group through the A83 Task Force.
Supplementary, Jackie Bailey.
I listened carefully to the Minister's response, and whilst I join in welcoming the temporary lifting of traffic lights, they are due to return in September, and that will cause more disruption for businesses and residents. The Rest and Be Thankful campaign group have suggested, as the Minister has acknowledged, an alternative solution that would be quicker and would be cheaper. So will the Scottish Government prioritise this alternative route for investment, and can the Minister outline what funding is actually in place for the Rest and Be Thankful over the lifetime of this Parliament?
Minister.
Well, I would want to assure the member of the Government's commitment to this. As she fully appreciates, ultimately budgets are determined through a parliamentary process. But as with our commitments on the A9 dualling, we recognise the significant disruption that is caused when there are landslips on the 83, which is why, like with the A9, we have made that commitment. And I would hope that Parliament would back us through the budgetary process to ensure that that capital investment can be delivered. We are, of course, committed to continued engagement, and on the specific points regarding alternative approaches, I will ask the Cabinet Secretary to update the member in writing.
Question 8, Callum Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to enhance rural connectivity and transport in the Scottish borders.
Minister Tom Arthur.
The Scottish Government recognises the importance of connectivity to the Scottish borders. We continue to invest in both digital connectivity and local and regional transport in partnership with councils and transport authorities. This includes support through relevant grants for bus services and active travel. Rail connectivity was transformed with the opening of the Borders Railway, and we continue to support the Scottish Borders Council in their work to consider the benefits and challenges of extending Borders Railway, funded by up to £5 million each from both the Scottish and UK governments through the Borderlands deal.
I thank the Minister for that answer. This is turning into the Tom Arthur show, Presiding Officer, today. So I wholeheartedly embrace his comments on the transformative power of the Borders Railway, and I'm pleased to hear the ongoing commitment to that from the Scottish Government. Alongside this, though, bus services remain critical for many, but with the cheapest online single costing £6.80 to go just from Peebles to Edinburgh, for example, does the Minister recognise the pressing need for a price cap in rural areas such as the borders, as these costs are currently unaffordable for many?
Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for his further question and certainly recognise the points he raises with regards to the importance of connectivity and in particular around bus travel and the need for affordable rural bus fares across the country, which is important, and that is why it is reflected in our commitment to extend the £2 fare cap pilot currently in operation in the High Trans and Z-Trans areas across the whole of Scotland.
Supplementary, Katie Hagman.
I thank the member for the initial question and the response from the Minister. I'm particularly pleased to hear about the transformation of the rail in the Scottish borders. I would like to ask if the Scottish Government will consider the wider implications of rural connectivity across the south of Scotland, giving particular attention to rail, including within my constituency of Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley. While trains to Ayr and Kilmarnock are good and frequent, the services south of Ayr through Maybole and Girvan and south of Kilmarnock through Auchinleck and New Cumnock are particularly limited.
Minister Tom Arthur.
Well, can I thank Katie Hagman for her question, and we want to assure the Government's commitment to ensuring all parts of Scotland are fully supported with regards to their connectivity, recognising the vital importance of effective, sustainable connectivity in regards to economic growth and development, and that is certainly something I'm deeply committed to through my ongoing engagement with South of Scotland Enterprise. With regards to the specific points raised in the question, ScotRail reviews its services regularly to ensure that services do meet passenger demand and adjust its services wherever possible, and we are committed to improving services for passengers in Scotland, which is reflected in our sustained investment. But I recognise the specific points that the member raises, and I will ask officials to pass that on to the Cabinet Secretary.
Question 9, David Linden.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the adequacy of provision for Islamic cemeteries and burial grounds in Scotland, including the support or guidance that it provides to local authorities in meeting the needs of Muslim communities.
Minister Marie Todd.
The Scottish Government recognises the importance of ensuring that burial provision reflects the diverse religious and cultural needs of all communities. Under the Burial and Cremation Scotland Act 2016, local authorities are responsible for ensuring that burial provision, including through joint arrangements with other local authorities where appropriate. The Burial Management Scotland Regulations 2025 enable burial authorities to designate parts of burial grounds for particular faith or belief groups. Decisions on the provision and designation of burial grounds rest with individual burial authorities, reflecting local needs, and burial authorities are encouraged to engage with all faith communities to understand demand. Local authorities, which manage the majority of burial grounds in Scotland, must also comply with the Equality Act 2010, including the public sector equality duty, requiring them to have regard to religious needs when delivering services, including bereavement services.
David Linden.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for that answer, and with a welcome and growing Islamic population in Glasgow and indeed in neighbouring authorities, there are two concerns that have been put to me. One is that we are running out of a lack of spaces for that, and that's certainly been the case in Hall Hill Road for many years in my own constituency. And the second issue is that the piece of legislation that the Minister refers to makes provision for a kind of two-tiered system in terms of charging. Now, for many Islamic communities where someone might have settled in Glasgow in the 1960s or the 1970s, they've moved out of into a neighbouring authority and they're being charged exorbitant amounts. So would the Minister be willing to give consideration to a cross-government approach with local authorities, because the piece-by-piece bit that we see with the 32 local authorities currently isn't working?
Minister.
So the requirement of the 2016 Act is that every local authority has to provide burial space, but the Act doesn't address burial space for any specific faith. Each local authority has to consider its obligations under the 2016 Act alongside equality legislation, and has to consider the potential indirect discrimination in relation to provision of burial space for its residents. The burial fees that are set by each burial authority, and the Scottish Government has no role in setting or regulating those prices. Now, I think the issue that Mr Linden describes has arisen because people in his area are being charged extra to bury folk in Glasgow, and many local authorities charge a lower fee for residents, partly to recognise their indirect contributions to the provision and upkeep of burial grounds throughout the council tax system. I think that Mr Linden, though, has identified a challenging area for his constituents, and I've asked officials to engage with Solace on this issue to get a better understanding of the provision of burial space for different faiths by local authorities.
Supplementary, Kate Nevins.
Hi, I'd like to thank David Linden for both those questions. In Edinburgh and Lothians East, there's only 80 spaces left at the Ratho dedicated burial sites for members of the Islamic faith, which is a real and urgent concern. And members of the Muslim community have also raised the issues around funeral support payment rises. I'd like to ask, one of the other issues that is also being raised is the fact that there's been a change to how long you can be buried for, and in the Islamic faith you need to be buried in perpetuity, not for a set length of time. So I'd like to ask the government what assessment they've made of whether Muslim communities, mosques, funeral committees, councillors and MSPs were adequately informed before the commencement of sections 14 to 16 of, or so this is the bit I can't remember. And now I don't know how to get that back. Sorry, everyone. Don't know what we do in this situation.
To take that on.
So I suspect the member is going to ask me about a specific section of the Act, which I will probably refer to officials, and we can pick this up offline in order to ensure that she gets a good answer to the question that she rightly raises. I have also heard concerns from constituents about the length of burial and the changes that have come in, so I'm more than happy to pick those issues up and work offline on them. Bora.
Irshad Ahmed.
Muslim communities have raised concern with me about the lack of burial plots across the Lothians. The number of available plots is low, and there is an urgent need for more permanent provisions in the area. Does the Cabinet Secretary have plans to meet with the Muslim community to discuss the provisions for Islamic cemeteries and burial grounds in Scotland, and also review the support or guidance that it provides to local authorities in meeting the needs of Muslim communities?
Minister.
So, as I said in my earlier answer, I've asked officials to engage with Solace on this issue to get a better understanding of the provision of burial space for different faiths by local authorities. The onus is on local authorities to work with their communities, and it is perfectly possible within the legislation for part of a burial ground to be designated for a specific faith. And in those local authorities who have communities represented in them who require specific burial requirements, absolutely should be working with those communities in order to ensure that their needs are met. The Scottish Government is absolutely committed and recognises the importance of ensuring that burial provision reflects the diverse religious and cultural needs of all communities, and be more than happy to update the members on the work that is ongoing on any outcome from that engagement between my officials and Solace.
Question 10, Adam Harley.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to improve access to after-school care and holiday clubs for children with autism.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallan.
Presiding Officer, children with additional support needs, including autism, mustn't face barriers in accessing childcare and holiday clubs. Inclusion is absolutely at the heart of our approach, and it's why we're testing both inclusive and specialist models, such as with partners like The Yard in Dundee, which is a support centre and adventure play space for children with disabilities and additional needs. Learning from these projects is informing our work to expand childcare to ensure that future provision is more accessible, more inclusive and responsive to the needs of children and their families.
Adam Harley.
Thank her for that reply. My constituent Nathan is 5 years old and has autism. Although he's able to attend school, there is no after-school care to accommodate his needs and very limited holiday care. That means Nathan misses out on activities and his parents struggle to balance work with childcare. Many families in Strathkelvin and Bearsden and across Scotland find themselves in exactly the same position. So can I ask the Minister, will she work with local authorities to ensure that children like Nathan don't continue to be excluded?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I thank Adam Harley for his follow-up question, and I would say to him and to Nathan and to Nathan's family that Nathan ought not to be missing out on that important both learning opportunities and childcare. So I referred to the early adopter communities that we've been working with in my original answer. This work is entirely about testing how childcare and early learning can be rolled out for children with specific needs, whether that is neurodiversity or whether it is a whole range of other needs that children may present with. We are doing that work now. We are taking the learning from it, and I'll work with him and with others as we embed that in the expansion of childcare that the Government's undertaking.
Supplementary, Stephen Bonner.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank Mr Halley for raising this very important matter. Parents in Uddingston and Belsill have told me that while support may be available during the school day, suitable after-school and holiday provision for autistic children remains extremely limited. What action is the Scottish Government taking to ensure that families can access affordable specialist support through the year, including school holidays across Lanarkshire?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Stephen Bonner for that question. In response, I would say there's two parts. The first is to say that we are already funding the provision of some of that specialist provision throughout Scotland. I mentioned The Yard in Dundee in my initial answer. I would also mention Support Health and Integration in Perth and Kinross, who are a fantastic service providing play and support for children with varying needs. And I have myself been able to, for example, visit Halesland Early Learning Centre, where there was a beautiful sensory room where children could go to have their needs met there. But the second part of my answer is that it has to improve, and that's exactly why the work we're funding now will inform the expansion of childcare in the coming years.
Katie Clark.
As the Cabinet Secretary says, there are clearly some excellent examples of after-school and holiday clubs for children with autism, but it's also clear that the provision of the support is patchy and very much depends on where you live. And indeed, all of us as MSPs are contacted by constituents who require additional support for children with autism. Councils clearly have a key role to play, and the Cabinet Secretary has already referred to that. There needs to be a specialised service. that caters for the support for sensory needs and social development that children with autism need. Realistically, within the budgets and the funding that the Cabinet Secretary has available to her, and indeed are available to councils who we all know are under significant budgetary pressure, to what extent is it going to be possible to roll out these kinds of services to all schools and to all children across Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Just to pick up on the last point of Katie Clark's question there, to what extent is it possible? It has to be possible, because we have to get it right for every child, and that's what the Government, working with MSPs, will be seeking to do. Katie Clark is quite right to mention that local authorities have obligations. Every child in Scotland should receive good quality care that meets their needs and respects their rights, and the Government expects local authorities and childcare providers to take steps to ensure that the services they offer are accessible to all, and that all children, whether with disabilities or additional support needs, have access to school-age childcare. Of course, there are also provisions under equality law that provide for that as well. But as my earlier answers have indicated, we understand that there is work to be done. We are funding pilots in our early adopter communities just now, and that will inform the work we take forward.
Katie Hagman.
I thank the member for raising this question, and to the Cabinet Secretary. I'm really heartened to hear of those pilots, including the Yard and the Adventure Play Centre that has been referenced. I'd like to ask that the Scottish Government, when considering the improved access for children with autism to after-school care and holiday clubs, that weight is given at every step to the opportunities that outdoor and nature-based learning brings.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I thank Katie Hagman for that question. I'm very personally a massive advocate for children and young people, and indeed all of us, spending time in the outdoors and in nature. I think it's very renewing for us all. I've mentioned a bit about early adopter communities so far. I would also point to the £4.5 million access to childcare fund that we've been providing since 2020. This is supporting families on low incomes specifically with the cost of childcare, and allowing us to again better understand how to expand childcare. But projects that are funded through this fund, they are about flexible delivery, they're about specialist services for children, they're about whole family support, but there is also a focus in that on outdoor provision, as well as increasing access to the families who are most likely to be living in poverty. And again, I would just give Katie Hagman an assurance that as Education Secretary, I'll be a proponent of outdoor education.
Willie, Rennie.
The Cabinet Secretary knows this is going to be difficult, because we know that in schools with 4 in 10 with an additional support need, they're already struggling to cope with the massive demand that teachers face, with the lack of backup support, with educational psychologists and speech and language therapists, and all the range of specialists that you need for this support. So are we drawing on the lessons from schools to make sure that the rollout of the after-school care and of the early years provision is taking that into account? Because so far, I don't have an awful lot of confidence that this is going to work, because we're not getting it right in schools.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Mr Rennie should take confidence on the rollout, for example, of the 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare that the Government has already overseen successful delivery of. I think his point about the propensity for additional support needs in our classroom, he mentioned the statistic 4 in 10. I think it's important to remember that there is a variety of needs within those statistics, from lifelong medical conditions through transient but difficult things that a child may go through in their life, through to, for example, having English language needs. So there's a broad range of children's needs within that. I was at St Sophia's primary school in Galston this morning, which was a fantastic visit, and one of the things that I was exploring with the teachers there this morning was exactly that question of managing the variety of needs both in the classroom and in early learning settings, and I can assure Mr Rennie that it will be at the forefront of my mind as we take this forward.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary, and one of the reasons why we finished slightly earlier for general questions is the fact that 3 out of 10 people did not actually lodge questions. I would hope that members would pay more attention to timescales and that they can indeed lodge general questions, not only to be able to ask questions themselves, but to our colleagues to come in with supplementaries. Before we move to First Minister's questions, I would like to invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery His Excellency Hamish Cooper, High Commissioner of New Zealand. And we'll just wait around 20 seconds and then we'll allow Mr Offord to ask his first question of the day. The next item of business is First Minister's questions for party leaders. Question 1, Malcolm Offord.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And may I begin by congratulating Steve Clark and the Scotland men's team on a great victory against Haiti and wish them all the best against Morocco. Last week, I asked the First Minister about a major problem with social housing in Scotland. A loophole where thousands of new arrivals from outside Scotland are able to present as homeless and must be found temporary accommodation by councils, who are then forced to place them ahead of local Scots already on the waiting list for permanent accommodation. In his answer last week, the First Minister did not seem to recognise there was any loophole at all. But the fact remains there has been a surge in demand for temporary accommodation in Scotland, and in Glasgow alone, 64% of those in temporary accommodation came to the UK as asylum seekers. Surely the First Minister must agree that it is unfair for local Scots on the long waiting list for permanent accommodation to be shunted to the back of the queue in order to give temporary accommodation instead to new arrivals. Does the First Minister not recognise this is fundamentally a matter of fairness and that Scottish hospitality is being abused by queue jumping?
First Minister.
I think what Malcolm Offord does with that question is use language which I think spreads division in our society, and it has to be called out for what it is, and it's exactly what I said last week with the language that Mr Offord used last week. There is the application of our approach to allocation of housing is based on equality for all individuals. And nobody is put to the back of the queue, to use the language that Mr Offord has used. What we do is we apply the principle that people who are eligible for housing in Scotland should be treated as eligible for housing in Scotland, and we apply houses accordingly on that basis.
Malcolm Offord.
So the First Minister once again doesn't answer the question. My question was entirely measured and factual, and I have not had a response. Perhaps he might write to me with a response. Moving from Glasgow to Dundee, the First Minister will be aware of the distressing incident last year involving a 12-year-old local girl who was arrested and widely vilified for wielding an axe and a knife to fend off a Bulgarian migrant and his sister. The legal process triggered by this distressing incident has now concluded, and the 12-year-old girl has been exonerated by the sheriff. The Bulgarian migrant has been found guilty of assaulting the child and of behaving in a threatening and abusive manner, including making sexual remarks to her and 3 other local girls. Now, at the time, Police Scotland hit out at misinformation online, which turned out to be true. And when Elon Musk posted the question, what kind of government arrests little girls who try to defend themselves, the First Minister also piled in, accusing him of spreading misinformation. The mother of this child, quite rightly, has demanded an apology from the police and from the First Minister for her daughter being branded as a liar, right-wing and a racist. So my question is, now this case has concluded, will the First Minister take this opportunity to issue such an apology?
First Minister.
Sir, the approach that I take on all of these matters is to follow carefully the advice that is offered to me and the quality information that can be available to me. And at the time of this particular incident, the information available to me, provided through Police Scotland, led me to the conclusion that I set out. And also, I'm certainly going to make no apology for taking on Elon Musk, who I don't think is an actor in good faith on these questions, if I may say so. Mr Alford is absolutely right that the legal process in this case is concluded, and the legal process indicates exactly as Mr Alford has indicated. So there is no reason for me to sustain the points that were put to me at the time in the statements by Police Scotland. So I of course apologise to the young woman and her family concerned, because we should all be dealing with the situation as the information presents it. But I'd simply caution Mr Alford on the tack that he's taking here, because I've seen too many cases where malevolent right-wing actors have piled in on particular issues to sow division in our society to have been proved to be completely incorrect. And there was a case in Stirling where the Police Scotland had to intervene very directly to counter the type of rhetoric that Elon Musk was circulating on in this particular case, and on that occasion was being circulated by Tommy Robinson. So I suppose the lesson that we should all draw from all of this is that we should all be very, very careful about what we say, because if we're not, we're going to fall into the trap of the right-wing malevolent individuals who are determined to sow division in our society, and I want to have none of that in Scotland.
Malcolm Alford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think there is another lesson to be learned from this, because this unfortunate case in Dundee brings into sharp focus the reality that white working-class girls across the UK have not been believed by the authorities when reporting sexual abuse. And this was illustrated by the remarks made at the time by Hamza Yousaf, a former First Minister and a sitting MSP, who watched the video and immediately passed judgment that this young person has had a significant amount of trauma in her life, and I can guarantee that without knowing fully her circumstances. So judgment made without even meeting her, judgment made just by looking at her. So in light of this sorry saga, can I press the First Minister on the status of the grooming gangs inquiry in Scotland that the SNP promised shortly before the election? When exactly will it begin, and when will its terms of reference be released?
First Minister.
President, on the first point that Mr Alford makes in relation to the reporting of sexual crimes and the actions taken to address sexual crimes in our society on women and girls in our society, because that's the general way I'm going to address that question, I think from the statistics that are regularly reported, and from even the discussions that we had yesterday about the record of Dorothy Bain as the Lord Advocate, Scotland has a formidable record of taking seriously the complaints of women and girls about sexual abuse and sexual violence, and I want to make it clear to Parliament that that will remain the case throughout the term of this government, because it is absolutely vital that where women and girls have experiences of sexual violence and sexual assault, that they have the confidence to report them. And it's clear from the conduct and the leadership of the former Lord Advocate, and I'm certain about that, about the Lord Advocate designate who will be sworn in at the Court of Session tomorrow, that the same approach will be taken in relation to the prosecution of such crimes. And indeed, one of the issues we're wrestling with in our prison population is the fact that very substantial numbers of individuals are now serving long prison sentences because of the perpetrating of sexual crimes of this nature. In relation to the grooming gangs inquiry, the Government has established the leadership of the grooming gangs inquiry, and the work is underway to ensure the terms of reference are finalised and the inquiry can start its work at the first available opportunity.
Anas Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 7 months after committing to a national review into maternity services, finally Professor Christine McCourt has been appointed as Chair. While this is welcome, more urgency is needed. Earlier this month, Health Improvement Scotland published their report into the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. It found expectant mothers had faced delays of up to 190 hours to be induced, and the consequences were serious. Delays increased the risk of sepsis, led to more complicated births, and in some cases resulted in women giving birth in areas not equipped to deal with complications or provide appropriate pain relief. Between 2019 and 2025, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde alone recorded 736 serious adverse events in maternity and neonatal services, and tragically 406 involved a death. So can I ask John Swinney, what immediate steps is his government taking to keep women and babies safe?
First Minister.
Sir, I acknowledge the importance of the point that Mr Sarwar raises with me, and let me say that although he is correct about the timescale for the establishment of the independent review into maternity services, the inspection in relation to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital is part of the wider Healthcare Improvement Scotland review of maternity services in multiple locations around Scotland, which was commissioned by the former Health Secretary and is now being taken forward. In relation to the report on NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's maternity services, I am concerned, and the Ministers are very concerned by the issues that are raised. The report does highlight a number of positive aspects of the delivery of care, but it also highlights significant areas for improvement. The Cabinet Secretary for Health has already met with Healthcare Improvement Scotland and with Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board to relay the Government's concern and to ensure that all of the 26 requirements of the report are taken forward urgently by the Health Board, and we have had reassurance on these issues. The Cabinet Secretary will meet with the Chief Executive of the Health Board once again before the parliamentary recess to review progress and to provide further reassurance that steps have been taken to implement the requirements of the report.
Anna Sarwar.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. The pattern in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital report was not new. Staff repeatedly raised concerns, warnings were made about unsafe pressures, concerns were raised about staffing levels and capacity, yet women continued to wait with delays to treatment. It was the same in Lothian and in Tayside. There are clearly systemic nationwide problems. That is why we called for the national review in November, and that's why we welcomed the Government's announcement it would happen. But 7 months on, it only now has a chair. Julie Keegan, who lost her baby boy, and Laurie Quaite, who lost both his wife and his unborn child, were promised they would be involved in the work of the task force and review. And 7 months on, and despite promises, families affected have heard nothing. So will John Swinney commit now that this already delayed review will meaningfully involve the women and the families who have first-hand experience of the failures in Scotland's maternity services?
First Minister.
I give Mr Sarwar that assurance. In relation to the recommendations that were made in connection with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, there has, as a response to those recommendations, been an approach which has seen most, if not all, of the recommendations implemented as a consequence of the report. And there has also been an increase in midwife employment to ensure that some of the other capacity issues are properly addressed. Now, the Government committed to the establishment of the maternity and neonatal task force, and steps were taken at the start of this year to take forward the agenda, and the Ministers are very happy and would indeed think it essential for there to be family engagement with the review, and I give that assurance will be the case today. In relation to the specific families that Mr Sarwar raises with me, the Health Secretary has committed to meet with those families, and I know that she will undertake that engagement.
Anna Sarwar.
I welcome that commitment from the First Minister. What worries families, though, is not simply what happened, it's the fear that will happen again. John Swinney often tells us that pressures on the NHS are unprecedented, but these women were not failed by a virus or by bad luck. They were failed by a system that knew there was a problem and did not act quickly enough to fix it. Because time and time again, we see the same cycle. Warnings are raised, whistleblowers speak out, patients suffer, ministers promise lessons will be learned, a review is commissioned, and then the next scandal arrives. 7 months to appoint a chair is not good enough, when every day that passes without action risks another adverse incident and risks another broken family. This needs to be about more than just a process, it needs to improve services. So when will John Swinney be able to guarantee that all women and babies will be safe in Scotland's maternity services across the country?
First Minister.
I think it's a fair point that Mr Sarwar puts to me, but that's what I would say to him to reassure him is that in the period in which we have been preparing the national review, there have been a series of inspections undertaken at the Government's behest. So the Government has required a number of these reviews to be undertaken. As Mr Sarwar correctly referred to, these have taken place in Tayside and in Lothian, and we now have the report in relation to NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and there are others in the country. And crucially, when those reviews identify recommendations, there is the discussion from the Government to make with the relevant health boards to ensure that those recommendations are implemented, and that's the case in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. But what there also is the drawing out of the patterns of evidence which are coming out of these reports, which are then the subject of a focus on improvement with all health boards in Scotland. So I say that to Parliament to provide reassurance to families that when these reports are undertaken by Healthcare Improvement Scotland, they result in learning and in the application of those processes in health boards around the country to ensure that we are constantly focused on improving services. And that's what the Government is trying to do in the delivery of maternity services. And crucially, the work of Healthcare Improvement Scotland helps us to scrutinise and to identify the weaknesses so they can be addressed and the recommendations implemented. And that will be the approach that the Government takes on an ongoing basis.
Ross Greer.
Thank you. Scotland faces a wave of applications for hyperscale data centres. If all of the applications currently in the pipeline are approved, they would consume up to 6,000 megawatts of power. That's more than 1.5 times our entire national power use at peak time. That's obviously completely impossible, but there currently isn't any clear government strategy or guidance for councils around how to deal with these applications. They're completely different to the kind of data centres which already exist in Scotland. We're not talking about socially and economically useful projects like the Edinburgh University supercomputer here. The government's policy is to support what they refer to as green data centres, but this position was decided before ChatGPT existed, before Elon Musk launched Grok, and before any of these hyperscale proposals came forward. So can I ask the First Minister, what is the Scottish Government's definition of a green data centre?
First Minister.
So the Government's definition of a green data centre is one that has been approved with due account being taken of the environmental implications of all developments that are required. And that will, of course, cover a range of the different issues that Mr Greer has highlighted in his work. In defining green data centres, it's for a planning authority to interpret and apply national planning policy in the circumstances of each case. They should consider factors such as renewable energy use, energy-efficient technologies, reduced water consumption and opportunities to reuse excess heat. And the Government's Planning Hub has been working with planning authorities to ensure that there is a wide and consistent understanding of those factors in coming to those conclusions.
Ross Greer.
Thank you. The First Minister's response indicates that the Government expects these centres to all be approached individually, but we need a coherent national strategy for this. It's not an abstract issue. The huge energy demands by these data centres will mean higher energy bills for everyone else and very real problems for the communities that surround them. Multiple London boroughs have reportedly put a freeze on new house building because of the impacts of data centres on the grid. The centres use so much power that if additional homes are built in those areas, there would not be the grid capacity to provide them with electricity. And this is urgent. There are applications that are set to be decided possibly before this Parliament returns from our summer recess. Data centres can play an important role in our economy, but not if we let a free-for-all of unworkable applications continue. So can I ask the First Minister today, will he agree to a moratorium on new data centres above 50 megawatts until we can agree a clear national strategy and give councils the specific guidance they need before they make decisions on individual applications?
First Minister.
I understand the concerns that Mr Greer puts to me, but what I would say is that I think the detail of planning policy addresses the issues about which he is concerned, particularly in relation to renewable energy use, particularly in relation to energy-efficient technologies, particularly in relation to water consumption and the generation of heat. So the planning policy is there to enable local authorities to make the appropriate determinations that they consider necessary. Obviously, there has to be an extensive amount of interaction and dialogue with individual communities to determine on these applications, or before these applications are determined, but the criteria for the consideration and the assessment of such developments is set out very clearly in planning policy.
Ross Greer.
I can't reconcile what the First Minister is saying about planning policy with how it is actually operating in practice, Presiding Officer, because he says that the definition of a green data centre is one where environmental considerations have been taken into account. There is no requirement to do an environmental impact assessment on a data centre application. In fact, 6 of the proposed hyperscale data centres in the pipeline right now have not undergone any environmental impact assessment, so they can't possibly meet the definition the First Minister has just set out. And they haven't undergone that assessment because councils are dealing with these applications in the dark. They haven't been given the guidance that the First Minister is implying they have. One of those proposals that hasn't undergone any EIA is the one at Auchtertool in Fife. It would be the size of 100 football pitches, and its 600 megawatts of energy needs would be monumental. That's the same as 1.3 million households for just one private business. Now, I'm not asking the First Minister to comment on individual applications. He can't do that. But I bring him back to the point that in total, these 24 applications announced so far would require 6,000 megawatts. That's more than 1.5 times our country's entire peak energy demands right now. The First Minister must recognise that's not possible. So will we come back to Parliament next week, before we suspend for the summer, and announce a pause on approvals for new hyperscale data centres until some kind of national plan is in place?
First Minister.
I think Mr Greer raises an important issue, and it gets to the nub of how prescriptive planning policy should be within Scotland. And it's a reasonable point, but I think what often is argued for in Parliament is for local decision-making within a policy framework set by government. Mr Greer is asking me to do something much more specific and much more instructive and determinative than that. And it's a perfectly reasonable point, but it's different to the prevailing mood in which Parliament has argued for planning policy to be undertaken. Indeed, if I think about the contents of National Planning, the National Planning Framework 4, much of NPF 4 is predicated on the basis of what I've just set out to Parliament, and Mr Greer will be familiar with the formulation of that document. So the Government will, of course, consider all emerging planning issues. We have got to monitor the implications of planning decisions at local level. But I think we've got to be, if Parliament wishes there to be a fundamental change to the way in which we determine on such issues, then Parliament will have to have an open discussion about whether these powers should be exercised nationally by the Government and not locally by individual local authorities, which has been the prevailing view of Parliament up until now. And obviously that's an issue that Parliament is welcome to consider.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. A new report has revealed massive oil and gas reserves off Shetland, an estimated 4.7 billion barrels of oil, which is great news. Yet our imports are at their highest levels since the 1970s, and much of the gas we use is fracked in the United States, generating 4 times higher CO2. These new fields can provide cleaner domestic energy for decades while supporting thousands of jobs. But the Aberdeen University researchers warn that their paper might serve as an obituary to the industry unless we get drilling. So does John Swinney agree that we should get drilling, or will he help to oversee the death of Scotland's oil and gas industry?
First Minister.
Well, what has undermined the North Sea oil and gas sector has been the energy profits levy that was applied by the Conservative government in the first place. That's precisely what is the difficulty just now. That is what makes it difficult for companies to invest. That's what companies are telling me, that they're finding it difficult to invest because of the energy profits levy that was started by the Conservatives and which has been carried on by the Labour government at Westminster. Now, where I think there is a legitimate argument to be advanced is in the emissions assessment between the activity that takes place within our own domestic energy sector and the activity that arises out of the extraction of fossil fuels, which are then imported into this country because of our ongoing requirements to use oil and gas resources in our energy mix. So, as part of any assessment of the appropriateness of any new licences in the oil and gas sector, that question of the total emissions of any individual project must be considered as part of any decision-making by the United Kingdom Government, and that's exactly what Scottish Government policy says on this issue.
Russell Finlay.
So he doesn't answer the question, but talks about the EPL, which his party first called for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, my colleague Douglas Lumsden is Aberdeen's oil and gas champion. He has persistently demanded to know when the SNP government will publish its delayed energy strategy. But now we discover that the SNP ministers have done precisely nothing about it in the first 5 months of this year. Absolutely nothing. For years, the sleek SNP have behaved in the most dishonest and despicable way. John Swinney pretends to support oil and gas while he still backs the anti-drilling policy of Nicola Sturgeon and the Green Party. So with 1,000 jobs being lost every single month, when will John Swinney start telling workers the truth?
First Minister.
Mr Finlay gets into ever more desperate attempts to try to avoid the responsibility that the Conservative government carries for the difficulties in the oil and gas sector, because Mr Finlay and his party in government brought forward the Energy Profits Levy. They applied it with impetus and increased it and extended it. And what is it doing? It's culling jobs in the north east of Scotland. It's the responsibility of the Conservatives. If Douglas Lumsden was actually at his work on any available occasion, he could be held to account for. He could be held to account for all his activities, but Douglas Lumsden, for weeks and weeks, has been skiving somewhere else. What on earth has the Conservative Party become? The bunch of skivers in this Parliament.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, this week marks the 9th anniversary of the Grenfell fire. I know all of our thoughts are with those who lost their lives in that tragedy and with those who survived it. The Humanity for Grenfell group are still campaigning for people living in cladded flats, and they are right to do so. Nearly a decade on from Grenfell, too many people are lying awake at night, wondering if their home might be at risk. And across Scotland, there are almost 1,000 buildings suspected of having dangerous cladding. So can I ask the First Minister why new figures out this week reveal his government has only got round to investigating 149 of them, and staggeringly, why cladding removal is underway in only 3 buildings in this country?
First Minister.
So one of the issues that we've had to wrestle with has been to have the effective legislative framework in place to enable us to deal with a number of issues, not least of which is about multiple ownership within individual buildings. Now, that legislation has been put in place by the government, and we are now, as a result of having the legislative framework in place, able to proceed with the important work that is necessary to be undertaken to investigate properties and to identify the remedial action that is required to be taken and the steps that have got to be taken as a consequence. So I understand the importance and the urgency of so doing, but the government has got to have a legal framework upon which to act, and we've secured that in the last parliamentary term, and we are now taking the steps to ensure that the actions can be taken to provide that reassurance to members of the public.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
But, presiding officer, we are nearly 10 years on from Grenfell, and the response we've just heard will come as no comfort whatsoever for those people who cannot insure or sell their homes, people who are actually in fear for their lives because they just want to know that their homes are safe. The UK government gave his ministers £100 million to conduct these cladding assessments. So money is not the problem, the lack of urgency is. It appears that not a single building has actually been checked in the past 6 months. More than 2 years ago, this chamber passed the cladding remediation bill. Ministers, ironically, said that this would speed up the process. So can I ask the First Minister, will he get a grip on this? Will he guarantee that by the time we reach the 10th anniversary of Grenfell next year, that every single one of these vital checks will have taken place?
First Minister.
So let me reassure Mr Cole-Hamilton that there is a variety of interventions taking place, some of which involves building assessments, some of which requires taking mitigation measures within buildings, and that work is underway, which will not show up in the statistics that Mr Cole-Hamilton has put to me today. But so there is other work. So essentially what I'm saying is that Mr Cole-Hamilton does not present a complete picture of the activity that is underway. But I assure him, with the legislative framework that we have in place, the steps that have been taken in the government's programme, the availability of the resources that we have within our budget, which of course the Liberal Democrats supported our budget in getting that into place, for which I'm very grateful. He knows that point, to ensure that we can take the necessary action to address and to reassure members of the public who are affected by this issue. And I'm very happy for ministers to provide update reports to Parliament in the course of the next 12 months to make sure that the concerns of members of the public, as expressed by Mr Cole-Hamilton, can be properly and fully addressed.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions, and I wish to advise the Chamber that next week I plan to reverse the order of leaders' questions. So we'll start with 2 questions from Alex Cole-Hamilton, followed by 2 from the Conservatives, 3 from the Greens, 3 from Labour and 3 from Reform. Point of order, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Pursuant to Standing Order 13.1, and in light of the Scottish Parliament Corporate Body's media access policy and rules, I rise to ask whether any member has sought to make a personal statement to this Parliament to address the questioning by media within the parliamentary estate. I ask this because, as of today...
This is not actually a point of order. It's a matter for the corporate body. Mr Hoy, it's a matter for the corporate body.
Presiding Officer, you could hear the point of order in full to determine whether it is a point of order.
I think I've heard what you want to say, and it's not a matter for the chair, it's for the corporate body.
On a further point of order, Presiding Officer, given the urgency of this, may I ask how we place this within this Parliament?
Thank you, Mr Hoy. The next item of business is a statement by Stephen Gethins on 10th anniversary of the UK referendum on EU membership. The member will take questions at the end of his statement, and there should be no interventions or interruptions. We will have 1 minute to enable a changeover of ministers. Thank you.
Can I ask members who are leaving the chamber to do so quietly, and members in the gallery? Thank you very much. As the presiding officer has said, the next item of business is a statement from the Scottish Government on the 10th anniversary of the UK referendum on EU membership, and I call Minister Stephen Gethins.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Next week, astonishingly, marks the 10th anniversary of the referendum on the United Kingdom's membership of the European Union, which I'm sure we can all agree was one of the most consequential moments in the history of this Parliament, the peoples of our shared islands and, of course, the rest of Europe. 10 years on, this Parliament must reflect with honesty, clarity and, above all, with a sense of responsibility to those whose lives have been shaped by that decision. That vote and its aftermath has meant economic vandalism, social damage, cultural loss and a weakening of our international relationships at a time when cooperation across Europe has never been more important. No department or issue has been unaffected, From our NHS, with, for example, the exit from the European Medicines Agency, to agriculture, the removal of access to the single market, and to education and the tragic loss of opportunities for our young people. Now, to be fair, MSPs got that 10 years ago. This Parliament responded to an event neither of its making or its choosing in a cohesive and responsible manner across the chamber, to be fair, something I know from first-hand experience was lacking at Westminster. Scotland did not vote for this, having overwhelmingly backed EU membership in a referendum for the second time. Despite that, MSPs in the Scottish Government consistently offered compromise to the UK. And in 2016, a motion by my predecessor, Michael Russell, called for Scotland to remain inside the single market, and that was overwhelmingly backed with support from SNP, Scottish Labour and the Greens. And to be fair, the Liberal Democrats didn't back it, but did call for a second referendum. Instead, we got the Internal Market Act, with Westminster taking back control, not just from Brussels, but also from Cardiff, Belfast and, of course, Edinburgh. EU membership had empowered devolved administrations, and leaving the EU has left the UK more centralised than ever. We were told that leaving the European Union would bring new opportunities, greater prosperity, more control, a stronger voice. I'm going to be generous and say that those comments were at best incorrect. Every sector was damaged. For businesses, leaving the EU introduced friction where there was once fluidity, barriers where there was access, and uncertainty where there was stability. In November 2023, nearly 40% of businesses in Scotland cited leaving the EU as the main cause of difficulties in trading overseas. UK-EU trade is estimated to be about a quarter lower in the long run than if the UK had remained in the EU, with non-tariff barriers with the EU being the main driver behind this shortfall. The agri-food sector in particular has struggled to export to the EU, leading to a substantial and sustained loss in one of our most important sectors for exporting and, of course, employment. Public revenues in Scotland and the public services that depend on them were estimated to have lost about £3.3 billion in 2025 alone, based on research by the National Institute for Economic and Social Research. That means that every day over £9 million is lost to public revenues in Scotland in 2025. And the question has to be, can we really afford it anymore? And for households, the consequences have been profoundly damaging. Cost of living pressures have been exacerbated at a time when families can least afford it, with a £250 increase in food and drink bills due to leaving the EU, with UK households collectively having paid an extra £7 billion due to cover the extra cost of doing business outside the single market. I have to say there is a particular tragedy for our young people. Every political generation should leave more opportunity than they themselves enjoyed. That should be a basic for all of us in this chamber. But we cannot say that with the removal of the freedoms to live, learn and work across the European Union. A British passport is now the most restrictive in Western Europe. And whilst the personal and financial losses have been great, we mustn't lose sight of security considerations just now. Deputy Presiding Officer, we meet at a time of profound geopolitical instability. Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, shifting global alliances, threats to energy and food security all underline the importance of strong cooperation in Europe. The rest of Europe gets that. The EU is not simply an economic bloc, it's a community grounded in shared values: democracy, human rights, the rule of law, equality and freedom. Now, leaving the EU was a bad idea 10 years ago. It's a dangerous idea today. It's left the UK, and by extension Scotland, more isolated at a time when the challenges we face demand deeper partnership, not detachment. And whilst there's been a change in ideology from the most recent UK government, I'm afraid to say it's still tinkering. Current efforts by the UK government to rebuild relationships are welcome, but not enough. The UK government's own figures suggest that the deal currently being negotiated, and far from certain of being delivered, will add only £9 billion to the economy by 2040. That's equivalent of about 0.2% of GDP. By contrast, the Office of Budget Responsibility estimates that leaving the EU reduced GDP by at least 4% So that loss is 20 times greater. And I ask the UK Government, where's the ambition? Where's the responsibility to individuals and businesses to reverse this damaging decision? Now, the Scottish Government has published a series of policy papers to set out clearly our objectives for Scotland's relationship with the EU in key areas that affect the lives of all of us: trade, education, energy. The UK Government could change this, but chooses not to. And we all pay the price for that inaction. And of course, there's a human dimension to all of this. Leaving the EU has affected families who have made their lives across borders. Those European citizens who pay us the privilege of making Scotland home. And I say this to my fellow European citizens, that I will continue to make the case for you every single day while I'm in this job. Every country that's joined the EU got wealthier. Its sovereignty was strengthened and its citizens' rights enhanced. The reverse happened for the one state that left. Leaving the EU is a backward step as Europe moves closer together. It's almost inevitable that we're going to rejoin. It's simply a question of how much damage we sustain until that moment. So where do we go from here? First, we will continue to press for the closest possible relationship between the UK and the EU, and I've been glad to already have discussed that with my counterpart in the UK Government, Nick Thomas-Symonds, and I'm grateful to him for his collaboration and conversation. I made it clear to him that both the EU and UK have much to gain for a better relationship with the EU. Just one example is energy, where Scotland is a massive exporter and very much part of the solution when it comes to pan-European energy security, a key concern in other European capitals. And the UK Government must make the most of the forthcoming UK-EU summit and ensure that the negotiations deliver the fullest possible outcomes. And we've been clear to the UK Government that we seek further improvements, although I have to say I'm still unsure as to why the UK Government is sticking to its damaging red lines on the single market and the customs union. It's an absolute mystery to me. Secondly, we must ensure that Scotland's voice is heard. Too often, Scotland's distinct interests and democratic choices have been sidelined. That can't continue anymore. We know how damaging that has been. And third, and most importantly, we must recognise that there's a limit to what can be achieved under current constitutional framework. The UK's 18th century model of union brought us to this place and is no longer fit for purpose. Brexit exposed its flaws. There is an alternative partnership model, and one that's being pursued by our neighbours, a 21st century model of union based on true respect and partnership between nations. That's something the EU and the rest of Europe gets and understands. Deputy Presiding Officer, 10 years on from the Brexit referendum, we owe it to the people of Scotland, particularly younger generations, to speak honestly about what has happened. The conclusion is unavoidable. Leaving the EU did not deliver what was promised. It left Scotland and the rest of the UK poorer, more isolated and less secure. The question for us all is what we're prepared to do about it. Now, I believe that Scotland's future lies in restoring our place at the heart of Europe. That's the challenge of the next decade, and it's one that this Parliament must meet with hope, clarity and determination. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in the statement. I intend to allow 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move to next business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question press the request to speak buttons now. I call Senga Beresford.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Firstly, I want to start by commemorating the hard work of many, particularly Nigel Farage, on pushing for this necessary referendum to leave the European Union 10 years ago. I want to take the opportunity to make known my long-held frustration with the idea that Scotland didn't vote for Brexit, when in fact far more Scots voted for Brexit than voted for the SNP in the recent election. 1,018,322 people in Scotland voted for Brexit, and 877,000 Scots voted for this rotten government. But those over 1 million Scots' voices aren't counted when this Parliament flies the EU flag at its door. We constantly hear this government blame Brexit for the country's failings. So can I ask the Minister, can he actually name one major economic challenge currently facing the people of the south of Scotland today that would not still exist had Scotland remained in the European Union? Or does he accept that this is another political excuse for continued SNP failure?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I'll thank the member for her intervention, for first of all reminding us that reform have a record, a track record, and it's a poor one. It's a track record of dragging us out of the EU at the cost of billions to the exchequer, which are now having to be made up. It's the track record of pushing up the cost of living, pushing up our energy prices and our food and drink prices during the cost of living crisis. And as the member rails against flags, I will remind her that is also a Council of Europe flag that sits outside this chamber and flies proudly and should remain there. One that underlines the rights that we have as European citizens and that her party wants to take away. And I'm afraid to say, Deputy Presiding Officer, I don't have all day to go through the failures. I went through some of them now, but I would remind her to go back to the south of Scotland and talk to them about the dip in agri-food exports that her region relies on so much, the increase in energy prices that are costing households in her area, and the removal of rights that previous generations took for granted.
I call Daniel Johnson, to be followed by Pauline Stafford.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. There is much that we agree in this statement. We may disagree on some of the constitutional conclusions, but I indeed might go further. The damage from Brexit, I would estimate to be between 6 to 8%, based on many measures. And I agree with him that our future has to be about closer alignment and a closer relationship with the European Union. And I note his reservations about the forthcoming treaty, but would he acknowledge that the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement will make a substantial difference for farmers in the food business, not least reducing or eliminating the £200 per consignment bill, and indeed easing trade across the Irish Sea, one of the deep ironies of the hard Brexit deal. But also on carbon trading, would he acknowledge the benefit there? But moreover, would he welcome if this summit becomes an annual event so we have further such treaties in the future?
Minister.
I'd like to thank Mr Johnson, not just for his question, but for the spirit. So, firstly, in a spirit of agreement, I think to emphasise the point on the 4%, I was using the Conservative figures. But even then, he and I agree that these are deeply worrying figures, and the Finance Secretary is sitting here. And just imagine what we could do for our public services with that money that's being thrown away right now. Now, on the point that he makes, yes, of course, look, I welcome any progress. The SPS, and I said that to Nick Thomas-Symonds the other day, it does still mean that the Conservatives spent hundreds of millions of pounds on border checks that are no longer needed. Hundreds of millions of pounds thrown away by the Conservatives, backed by reform, incidentally. But he talks to another point here, and he's now talking about annual talks around this. Because this doesn't end. Brexit doesn't end until you rejoin, and he points to that. Annual talks. So why on earth are we still backing leaving the single market and the customs union, incidentally, something that Labour backed 10 years ago? Now, I've no idea what successes he sees with the Conservative Party that they've achieved in that period that's made him change his mind, but I certainly have it, and I would urge his party and the UK Government to review those lines as a matter of urgency.
Can I inform the Chamber that there are a large number of questions in, and if we're going to get through them all, we'll need more concise questions and answers. And I call Pauline Stafford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for this statement on what is one of the saddest anniversaries for our country. 10 years on from the Brexit vote, Scotland's artists, musicians and creative professionals continue to face significant barriers to working and touring in Europe. These challenges have contributed to fewer touring opportunities and reduced international career development, particularly for young and emerging artists. While many of the key levers remain reserved to the UK Government, can the Minister outline what further action the Scottish Government is taking to support Scotland's artists and creative sectors, including through advocating for the UK's participation in programmes such as Creative Europe and its successor, Agora EU?
Minister.
Can I thank the member for raising this? Is a really important point. Now, the Scottish Government would welcome a return to Erasmus+. We do pressing for continued participation. That's good for students, apprentices and teachers as well. And we're calling for the UK Association to Agora EU to restore the vital cultural collaboration that Pauline Stafford quite rightly brings up. We've also repeatedly pressed the UK Government for easements and targeted support for touring artists by the barriers created by Brexit and advocating for an EU mobility agreement to reduce obstacles. But Pauline Stafford's right. These challenges stem directly from leaving the EU against Scotland's will, and the consequences: 82% of musicians report reduced EU earnings, 65% fewer invitations, and 57% unable to take up work due to the increased costs. It's just not worth it.
I call Gillian Mackay to be followed by Craig Hoy.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. We all know how damaging Brexit has been to our economy and our democracy, and I'm pleased to hear the Minister highlight that human cost, because I think that's the tangible thing that everybody can realise that we've lost. At a time where global relations are so unstable, we need to work more closely with our European allies. That involves having a strong programme of international engagement. So can the Minister confirm that he will prioritise maintaining the network of international offices, and particularly those in Europe, to assist with that alignment?
Minister.
Can I thank Gillian Mackay for a question? Also, I'm going to say, unlike others, the coherence of her party on this particular issue, because I think it makes a lot of sense. But she's also right in terms of the human cost. And when we talk about facts and figures, they're important and help us understand. If the Finance Secretary will forgive me a moment highlighting that cost, that human cost I know that she gets in terms of the impact on people. And Gillian Mackay's right. I think that our offices across Europe and elsewhere have done a fantastic job. It was great to see the First Minister in Boston. That's not just good for supporting our football team, it's good for jobs and investment at home. Jobs rely on that international engagement. And I want to pay my part that over the past decade, the fantastic job that the team in Brussels have done in maintaining that Scotland's interests are heard, but also sticking up for jobs and investment back home. That's a vital part of that. And that's something that I can assure her I continue to be committed to.
Call Craig Hoy to be followed by Duncan Dunlop.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Was this statement not an entire waste of valuable parliamentary time? And isn't it symptomatic of this government's obsession with matters beyond the control of this Parliament? But I will indulge the Minister by asking him this simple question. By what economic logic would we want to leave a union where we are a net beneficiary to become, at the flick of a switch, the member of a union where we'd be expected to be a net financial contributor?
Minister.
Do you know, I think it says something of where the Conservatives have gone in terms of their disregard for the economy and for jobs, whereby the member does not think that this is an important statement. Every single day, every minister in this government is having to deal with the consequences of a decision foisted on them by Boris Johnson and his government. Now, on the point, it also speaks to that sense of British exceptionalism that the Conservative Party is renowned for. Every country in Europe gets that a 21st century model of union is one of equality and partnership. That's why every country that joined the EU got wealthier and the country that left the EU got poorer. And that's on them.
Duncan Dunlop to be followed by Alan Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. For the last 10 years, the Liberal Democrats have been clear. We believe we never should have left the EU. We remain the strongest defenders of the European Union and the Union of the United Kingdom, because being a member of both has preserved Scotland's peace and prosperity. And both are now needed more than ever as our world is in a much more volatile place. But being pragmatic, can I ask the Minister if you'll join calls for the UK Government to immediately begin talks with the EU on a new growth and defence partnership that would include a new UK-EU customs union, rejoining the single market and a new defence pact with our EU allies?
Minister.
So, first of all, to Mr Dunlop, I'm going to be generous. Look, I've voted to the closest. I've voted for membership of the Customs Union, the single market, you name it, when I was at Westminster. I also am in askance as to why the UK would not join SAFE, that defence procurement project, when even Canada has joined that. So on that point, I take his point. What I don't understand about the Liberal Democrats who profess to be strong advocates for the EU is that we know that even joining the customs union in the single market is the second best option. The Treasury tells us it's the second best option. Why go for the second best when you can go for the best option?
Call Alan Smith to be followed by Max Bannerman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think it's right that we take good stock of the fact, the reality that the Brexit lies have not been delivered. But I'm more interested in the future, when we actually have the solution, which we know Brexit was missold. Brexit has made everything worse. Brexit made everybody poorer. But the solution, to our mind, is independence in Europe. So the Minister will have taken good note just this Monday that the EU has commenced the Cluster 1 accession talks with Moldova, which is nothing like our resources, and Ukraine, which is under illegal occupation and daily bombardment. Does that not nail forever the idea that Scotland could somehow not become an EU member really very easily?
Minister.
You know, Alan Smith and I have one thing in common, which is, well, many things in common, one of which is we've served in a parliament that we didn't see a future in. I now serve in a parliament that I do see a future in. Alan's now in his second parliament that Scotland has a future in. And he's right, the rest of Europe sees a future in that as well. It speaks to exceptionalism. It speaks to isolationism. You know, I can remember these Brexiteers who were telling us that there'd be a big queue of countries that were going to leave in the aftermath of the UK's profound success. Well, where are they? Instead, we've seen countries queuing up to join the European Union. The isolation and exceptionalism espoused by Reform and their Conservative allies has got us to this disastrous place, and the rest of Europe has learned a lesson from that.
Max Bannerman to be followed by Jenny Minto.
Can I thank the Minister for his statement and welcome to his place? In my region, Murray voted by just 122 votes to remain in the EU, so I think it's a bit wide off the mark, as Senga Beresford has said, for the Minister to claim overwhelming support for the EU project. Now, in his statement, the Minister made no mention of fishing, which is unfortunate. Scotland accounts for almost half of all UK fishing industry jobs and more than 60% of the value of all UK landings, but half of our commercially fished species are overfished or at very low population sizes, and catch limits are being set above scientific advice. And under the Labour Lancaster House Agreement, European access to overfished Scottish waters has been set in stone for the next 12 years. And Scotland only benefited from 28 million out of the 360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. So does the Minister not agree with me that the best way to safeguard this vital industry would be to utilise Brexit benefits so that any recovery from our territorial waters gives priority to Scottish boats, particularly smaller vessels?
Minister.
I keep hearing that our Brexit benefits are that we've not had the proper kind of Brexit. It was kind of like the arguments I was hearing about communism in the 1990s, that we just hadn't had the right kind of communism. It's very much the same kind of argument. Now, we've seen a drop in our agri-food exports. We've also seen the impact that leaving the single market has had, not just in exports, but in terms of staffing as well. And this is the second Reform member who stood up and struggled with basic maths. The people of Murray voted to remain in the European Union, not for the first time, for the second time. It's basic maths, and I'd encourage them to catch up.
I call on Jenny Minto to be followed by Mark Griffin.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for his statement and agree that Scotland should most definitely be at the heart of Europe. Ending the free movement of labour has severely restricted the pool of workers in key sectors in Argyll and Bute. Tourism, hospitality and the care sector have all struggled with staff shortages and recruitment difficulties, and I've lost count of the number of organisations that have spoken to me directly about this. So does the Minister agree with me that given the UK Government has neglected to act to resolve this issue, they should step aside and devolve the powers to the Scottish Parliament so that we can introduce a Scottish visa system that supports all these sectors and more?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Jenny Minto rightly highlights is that Brexit has created a real and growing workforce challenge across Scotland in sectors like tourism, hospitality, social care, other areas that have traditionally relied on access to EU labour, and Jenny Minto knows the impact that that's had in areas like Argyll and Bute. Now, the Scottish Government has highlighted and discussed these challenges with the UK Government and proposed practical solutions like a tailored Scottish visa and a rural visa pilot. And indeed, when I was a member of the House of Commons, I tried to take a private member's bill through on this very matter. Now, we continue to encourage the UK Government to address this, to work with the Scottish Government. I do note that it's something that the Labour Party or the Scottish Labour had previously talked about, but just like everybody else, UK Labour doesn't seem to be listening to them.
I call Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister set out the damage that has taken place in this country as a result of leaving a political and economic union, and there's nothing in the statement that I can disagree with. But what I would say to the Minister is that in conclusion he asked what we're prepared to do about it. Is the Government able to set out a bit more detail as how we pull together Parliament and work together on a similar basis to the vote that you mentioned in his statement to actually achieving that outcome together?
Minister.
Well, Mr Griffin's right. 10 years ago there was a vote, an important vote in the Scottish Parliament that offered a compromise. You know, I think there was only one member of the Scottish Parliament who actually, out of 129, who backed leaving the EU, which speaks to the greater wisdom that was collected in this place maybe than in the Westminster Parliament. And there are things that, look, as I've said to others, I will happily engage, and I've engaged with Nick Thomas-Symonds. But if we look at the potential benefits being 20 times less than the loss that we are sustaining, we see the impact. And I talked about, look, I welcome Nick Thomas-Symonds and where he's engaged. But where are we on the energy sector? Where are we on the freedoms that young people enjoyed? All these range of areas where we will continue to press the UK Government to go much further. And I have to say I'm exceptionally disappointed in the Labour Party that has veered off to what is, under any measure, a hard Brexit that was brought in by Tories and endorsed by Reform. I would encourage his government, and I say this in good faith, to be much, much more ambitious, and I would urge the Scottish Labour members in this to join us in making that case.
I'm encouraging shorter questions, shorter answers if possible, to allow every member to come in. Call Alex Kerr to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Despite every single council area in Scotland voting to remain in Europe, we're dragged out against our will. Companies like DFDS, who operate a logistics hub in Larkhall in my constituency, and who are one of the major routes to the continent for seafood caught on the west coast, and their clients are paying the cost of remaining shackled to Brexit Britain. With previous figures showing £4 billion has been lost, could the Minister provide the most up-to-date figures for the cost to the Scottish economy of leaving the European Union and the single market, and the potential economic growth that could be achieved by rejoining our European neighbours?
Minister.
Well, I'd like to thank Alex Kerr. Well, we know that Scotland was one of the hardest hit parts of the UK when it came to Brexit, and the figures I used earlier on, a £3.3 billion reduction in revenues, and the House of Commons research commissioned by the Liberal Democrats with a £90 billion loss, or £250 million every day. The Deputy First Minister knows exactly the cost that is having, and we need to reverse this. And I thank Alex Kerr for his very sensible question. I'll continue to work with him and others in how we can minimise the damage.
Call Patrick Harvey to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
The UK-EU Partnership Bill announced in the King's Speech will undoubtedly do a lot less good than rejoining would, but if it has any potential to begin undoing some of the damage of Brexit, then we should try to work constructively with it. Has the UK Government been working collaboratively with the Scottish Government to agree the terms of that bill, and is the Minister confident that there will be no breach of the devolution settlement or the Sewell Convention?
Minister.
I'd like to thank Patrick Harvey. He'll be well aware of the impact of the internal market that had on this place, and the fact that it took away powers. It centralised the UK and the breaches that came in subsequently. I'm relatively new into this job. I'm going to give the Labour government the benefit of the doubt. Would like to see an awful lot more. Anything that brings us closer to the rest of Europe and minimises the damage is something we'll welcome. I will always look to work with colleagues in a constructive manner. But let's be clear, we are minimising the damage that has been done. Damage is still being done, and it's not being forced upon us. It is a political choice.
Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Living, working or studying abroad is a hugely enriching experience to encounter new cultures and skills. What estimation does the Minister make of the social and educational impact on Scots young people who are being denied the opportunity to expand their horizons in a way previously facilitated through freedom of movement within the EU and the likes of the Erasmus Plus programme?
Minister.
I'd like to thank Jackie Dunbar for this. She'll get it, given the impact of educational institutions and the impact on young people in her own constituency in Aberdeen. Look, I don't want to make this too personal, but just let me reflect for a moment. I was an Erasmus student. It was transformative for me. I could never have done it financially or otherwise if it had not been for those connections. And what I find heartbreaking, there's no other word for it, is that I am now in a political generation who are not bequeathing many of these opportunities that we ourselves enjoyed. And that's something we all need to reflect on. Now, look, the movements on Erasmus Plus are welcome. It's progress. But it's not back to where we were. And the removal of the right to live, learn and work across the whole of Europe and the reduction in having a British passport is something that young people will bear the consequences of even more than other generations.
The next item of business is a statement by Hannah Mary Goodlad on provisional outturn 2025 to 2026. The Minister will take questions at the end of this statement, and there therefore should be no interventions or interruptions. I'll give the Minister and front benches the opportunity to take their seats. I call on Hannah Mary Goodlad.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to make my first statement to Parliament as the Minister for Public Finance. I give a commitment to staying on time and to Willie Rennie, who unfortunately isn't here, to being boring. Also, very importantly, to update the provisional outturn against the Scottish budget for the financial year of 25-26. We have once again remained within the restricted HM Treasury expenditure limits and managed Scotland's finances responsibly, while continuing to protect public services and delivery on our bold ambitions for Scotland. Ambitions grounded in equality, hope and fairness. The provisional fiscal outturn for 25-26 is £55.9 billion against a total fiscal budget of £56.3 billion. This represents an underspend of £358 million, just 0.6% of our total budget. It is important to remind Parliament that we absolutely cannot overspend by a penny, and therefore must always generate an underspend in order to guard against any late movements in devolved tax, social security spend, demand-led programmes, as well as providing contingency against post-year end adjustments. Up to £200 million is set aside for such a contingency. The underspend incorporates £312 million of resource, £42 million of capital and £4 million of financial transactions. In addition, out with our headline outturn underspend, our provisional non-cash position is an underspend of £249 million against a £4 billion budget. A large proportion of this relates to non-cash funding for student loan impairments, which of course are not required at the same level in Scotland because of free university tuition. It is the headline outturn underspend of £358 million which will be carried forward through the Scotland Reserve into future financial years. There is no loss of spending power to the Scottish Government. That is crucial and critical for me to stress, with the underspend supporting the 26-27 budget subject to confirmation at final outturn. As the previous Parliament was advised, £150 million of this underspend is already reflected in our funding assumptions for 26-27, with the remainder providing the necessary flexibility at the end of the year. I must stress the provisional outturn differs from the annual accounts position that will be published in the autumn following audit. The accounts are based on different reporting boundaries and include ring-fenced non-cash budget positions such as depreciation, which of course can't be spent on a day-to-day basis. In addition, the outturn incorporates final funding decisions, including borrowing, which are taken towards the end of the financial year. Delivering a balanced position has required careful management in a context of ongoing inflationary pressures and global uncertainty. Our budget operates within incredibly tight margins. We are not permitted to overspend in any year. Any underspend must remain within the Scottish Reserve limit of £734 million. Our budget is largely determined by the UK Government spending decisions. We cannot borrow for day-to-day costs. We must operate within fixed annual limits, and we face significant uncertainty as our final budget is only confirmed late in the financial year. In many ways, we play a game with two hands behind our back. However, despite these challenges, we have continued to deliver for Scotland, focusing on key priorities of growing the economy, tackling child poverty, the cost of living, improving the NHS and public services, and tackling climate change. Scotland's economy grew faster than forecast in 2025 at 1.4%, and unemployment remained lower than that in the rest of the UK, averaging less than 4% across the year. Scottish interventions to tackle child poverty are working. Around 320,000 children benefit from the Scottish Child Payment, with modelling suggesting that this will keep 50,000 children out of relative poverty. That is something to be proud of. Expansion of free school meals reached over 360 pupils, reducing household costs by £450 per child. Free bus travel for under-22s generated over 85 million free bus journeys, lowering transport costs, improving access and improving employment. Again, money well spent and much to be proud of. Relative child poverty rates in Scotland remain 6% lower than the UK, reflecting the impact of devolved policy interventions. None of this is by accident. These are political choices. This is by design from a Scottish Government led by the SNP. We have continued to deliver the most comprehensive cost of living support package in the UK. Free prescriptions, the abolition of peak rail fares and peak ferry fares in the Northern Isles, no tuition fees for Scottish students, free bus travel for over 2.4 million people, NHS free at the point of use, baby boxes and a social security system based on dignity and respect. In the face of UK Government decisions that have increased pressure on household finances, we have consistently chosen a different path. For example, we have invested almost £150 million to mitigate the impacts of UK Government policies such as the bedroom tax and the benefit cap. This includes activities such as our discretionary house payments and the Scottish Welfare Fund. This money could have been spent on services like health, education, transport, or on further ambitious anti-poverty measures, and would have paid for around 2,000 teachers or almost 3,000 Band 5 nurses. We are also committed to delivering a just transition on energy and realising its benefits for this nation. with the opportunity to lower household costs and transport costs, improve energy security and enhance public health. Economic benefits are emerging, with green jobs continuing to grow faster than in other UK regions. Between 1990 and 2024, Scotland's emissions reduced by over a half, whilst the economy grew by almost 70%, proving that it is absolutely possible to grow an economy and reduce CO2 emissions at the same time. In June last year, we published our public sector reform strategy, setting out a vision for Scotland where everyone can access public services that are efficient, high quality and effective. This strategy commits us to a preventative, joined-up and efficient system that improves outcomes while remaining financially sustainable. As the Cabinet Secretary for Public Sector Reform last week recently affirmed, transforming public services is essential to keep them effective and focused on people's needs. Presiding Officer, none of this is accidental. There is a reason why Scotland is outperforming the UK at every turn. We are putting business, hope, ambition into every decision that this government takes. And that is against a backdrop of a very challenging financial fiscal framework that we have dictated to us by the UK government. The figures reported today are provisional and subject to change pending completion of the year-end audits. Final figures will be published later this year, once all bodies have completed their audits. We have an enormous task ahead, and I've been really heartened to hear the state of collaboration actually across the Chamber on this issue. It's also a vital task ahead. A challenging financial context. We have to redesign the state, whilst ensuring Scotland becomes a country that completely and wholly eradicates child poverty. A country that remains open for business and growth, a country that celebrates our islands and rural communities, and a country that says birthplace is a chance, but home is a choice. We in this chamber, well, we also have a choice to work together on these issues, and a choice to solve them together. One thing is resoundingly clear from this election. Scotland wants us to work together. Scotland needs us to work together, and that's actually what Willie Rennie again said towards the first weeks of this Parliament, and I'm glad he's back in the Chamber to join us now. So my message is this: engage with us, work with us. My door is open, as are my colleagues, and I commend today's figures to Parliament, and I'll now take questions.
The Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in the statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. Members who wish to ask a question should press the request to speak buttons. I call on Kim Shimulian.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for her statement. Given the importance of major infrastructure projects to growing the economy in this 7th session, can the Minister advise which projects from the current infrastructure plan are currently taking place and which have passed the business test and are active planning stage?
Minister.
I thank the member for the question. We're going to be publishing an update on the capital spending after the summer recess, so you will be getting more information post-summer.
Joe Fagan, to be followed by Don Black. Joe Fagan.
Thank you, and can I welcome the Minister, a fellow newbie, to her position and thank her for her statement. The Auditor-General said of last year's consolidated accounts that short-term measures are not addressing the £4.7 billion fiscal gap, and that the Scottish Government cannot clearly demonstrate that public spending is delivering the intended outcomes. So what assurances can the Government give Parliament and indeed the Auditor-General at this provisional outturn stage that things will be different in the next set of consolidated accounts? Last year was not year zero for public service reform. I've received figures today from Spice indicating that the Scottish Government's operating costs, accounting for inflation, have risen in real terms by almost 40% in the 5 years up to 24-25. So did the Government recognise those figures, and can they tell us how variances in operating costs contribute to the outturn position? And do they agree that to make the public finances more sustainable, progressive intent must lead to progressive outcomes, reactive spending has to come down and preventative spending has to be scaled up, and the Scottish Government needs to work harder to make public money better serve the public interest across Scotland?
Minister. I thank Mr Fagan for his question. And I also want to reflect that just yesterday on the Labour benches, we heard that devolution has worked. And indeed, I would like to see that this Parliament goes further in that. We are playing this game of managing our public finances with both hands held behind our back. This is no way to manage a country, or no normal way to manage a budget and manage a financial year. The first principle of any business is to make sure that we remain in the green and not in the red, and that is exactly what we have managed to do. When it comes to public sector reform, this is something that this government is absolutely committed to doing so. It is something that we have to make sure that there is an efficient, joined-up service and more preventative. Our operating cost for the Scottish Government last year was just under 900 million. Now that is coming down year on year. We're seeing that our jobs are being frozen, and we're also making sure that we're having a recruitment reduction towards 2030. Our eye is on the ball, Mr Fagan, when it comes to that, and I'll look forward to working with you with more ideas as to how we can further tighten our operating costs in the years towards 2030.
I'd remind members that there was recently guidance issued indicating that questions should be up to about 45 seconds and answers up to about a minute. So we should try and keep both questions and answers brief. Don Black to be followed by Laura Moodie. Don Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The high rates of inflation we've seen in recent years, thanks to Westminster economic mismanagement, have had a huge knock-on effect on the Scottish budget. Does the Minister agree that this makes a clear case for the block grant to Scotland to be inflation-proof to prevent the erosion of Scotland's funding?
Minister.
I thank Ms Black for her question. We recognise the significant pressures that inflation has placed on public finances in recent years, and we understand the importance of ensuring Scotland's funding keeps pace with rising costs. However, this also highlights the wider limitations of our current fiscal framework, like I said, which does not provide the Scottish Government with the flexibility needed to be able to respond effectively to economic shocks, especially towards the end of the year. The block grant remains linked to the UK Government's spending decisions, meaning Scotland's funding can increase or decrease regardless of Scotland's own needs and priorities. Again, playing the game with both hands behind our back.
Laura Moodie to be followed by Craig Hoy. Laura Moodie.
Thank you. The Minister's statement highlighted a substantial cash underspend compared to previous years of £358 million. This includes £83 million on education, £98 million on housing, £35 million on climate and £59 million on transport. In the context of climate, nature and housing emergencies and the high barriers and costs currently faced by Scots and highlighted in this chamber of high childcare and bus fares, why is the Scottish Government not spending to match the budget allocation in these critical areas?
Minister.
I thank Ms Moodie for her question. It is important to understand that this is a half-year outturn statement. It does not mean that funding allocations stop in March. This is not a sort of a one-year cliff edge, that there is reallocation when we come to the budget in 2027 looking forward. When it comes to climate and energy in particular, the underspend specifically that you can see line by line is actually by delays and reduced delivery across both resource in terms of 14 million and capital programmes. And that's primarily due to delays in the project and sort of underspend that we see towards Grangemouth, Just Transition Fund, also the offshore wind supply chain project that we put in place, and Project Willow.
Craig Hoy to be followed by Liam MacArthur. Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for the invitation to work together. And I'll be meeting with the Deputy First Minister next week to that effect. And if the new fiscally prudent small state Scottish Government can commit to reducing tax and cutting the benefits bill, I think we're going to have a fruitful relationship in this Parliament. But the statement comes today at a time when Scotland's economy grew by just 0.1% in the first quarter of this year, compared with 0.6% across the UK. Employment has fallen by 0.8 percentage points over the last year, while economic inactivity has risen by 0.7% to 22.7%. What does this tell us about this SNP government's record on financial and economic management?
Minister.
I thank Craig Hoy for the invitation to work together, and let's hope that that sentiment remains as we progress through the months. I think we need to look more broadly at where Scotland has been and where the country is going. This is a country that has made an absolute priority to be reducing child poverty as one of its moonshots. We are leading the UK in terms of 6%, and I think that's an absolute worthy ambition. Let's dig into the economics a little more. Our GDP grew by 10% versus 8% on the rest of the UK in the last decade. We've been very relentless as this government on making sure that we prioritise business, creating a Scottish National Investment Bank, making sure that we're taking £500 million infrastructure investment into offshore wind, making sure that we're putting money behind a tech-scale initiative. We have growth and ambition at the heart of everything that we are doing here. And I think the member would be well versed to realise that outside of London, where is the most attractive place to be doing investment and business? It is absolutely here, north of Hadrian's Wall, in Scotland.
Liam MacArthur to be followed by David Linden. Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, President Officer. Can I also thank the Minister for early sight of her statement? While I accept that an underspend is an inevitable part of ensuring a balanced budget and that the money is protected for future spend, at a time where critical infrastructure is desperately needed across Scotland, £358 million is an alarming sum, particularly in the area of transport. We see an underspend of £63 million, including a large amount of capital. This follows a similarly large underspend the year before. Why is it, Minister, that we're seeing such an underspend in areas where key upgrades are desperately needed?
Minister.
I thank fellow Northern Isles MSP for that question. Underspend is only normal in this UK bizarre context. Every part of the UK is underspending, and actually when it comes to underspend, we are best in class. We have a 0.6 underspend. Wales and Ireland, Wales is at 1.8, England is at 1.3. That's not an easy thing to manage. It's like landing a Boeing 737 on a postcard stamp, or taking a Singapore airline and trying to land it on a Coast Guard helipad at Sunbury Airport. So it is absolutely no mean feat. When it comes to transport, we have lower than expected rail costs and income improvements which have actually reduced resource spend. And on capital, there have been delays in projects which we have our sight on, we have our eye on, and it is in our agenda when it comes to rephasing of rail and ferry infrastructure, as we have spent a lot of time talking about in this Parliament and will do in months to come.
David Linden to be followed by Malcolm Offord. David Linden.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer, and I commend ministers on what is incredibly tight fiscal management. I'm interested particularly in the social security and social justice aspects of the figures. Scotland, of course, now has 17 devolved benefits, and so can I ask the Minister which of the devolved benefits showed the largest variance when it came to forecast versus outturn, and what the Minister's reflections on that would be, because, as she acknowledged in her statement, it is very difficult to predict these things.
Minister.
I thank Mr Linden for his question. Social security expenditure is demand-led, as we know. Spending is determined by the number of people who are eligible for support and who apply for it. And everyone who qualifies must receive the payment they are entitled to under the relevant policy. This approach inevitably creates a degree of volatility and forecasting risk within the budget. However, it is a deliberate choice of this government and reflects our commitment to ensuring that eligible people receive the support that they are entitled to. Again, it comes back to dignity and respect. Despite these challenges, financial performance remains strong. The final outrun was within 0.3 of the £6.5 billion budget, demonstrating the overall accuracy of forecasting and effective management of a large and complex demand-led programme.
Malcolm Offord to be followed by Martin Day. Malcolm Offord.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I please ask the Minister to review the very complicated and burdensome income tax regime in Scotland, in light of the fact that the 6 bands now presenting the Scottish Fiscal Commission say it's collecting less money than was forecast, last year by £850 million, and in fact that forecasting looking forward to next year is running at a lower rate. We're raising less money than the UK on a per capita basis. On that case, can I draw the Minister's attention to the recent ICAS report, Institute Chartered Accounts of Scotland, who is saying, perhaps with the unintended consequences of this regime, is that this is hurting productivity. And if the idea is actually to collect more tax revenue, that should be the most important thing. If this is actually collecting less tax revenue, can we please review this regime?
I thank Mr Offord for his question. We have a commitment within this parliamentary term to be reviewing the income tax bands, and I know that there's a commitment across these benches to looking into simplifying the 6 that we have. When it comes to tax revenue within Scotland, we are £1.8 billion more because of the tax progressive that we have taken within these benches. But I think it's wider than that. It's to look again to this point of playing the game with 2 hands behind our back. I would like more tax-raising powers to be devolved to Scotland. I see, if you just look northwest of the islands that I come from, a tiny island, the Faroe Islands, 50,000 of a population, they only have an economy of fish and aquaculture. They don't have energy, they don't have oil, they don't have whisky like we do, or tourism. And yet they are thriving because they take decisions on where it matters and for the people that live with those decisions. So yes, please, more tax powers to Scotland.
Martin Day to be followed by Daniel Johnson. Martin Day.
Thank you. Next week marks 10 years since Scotland was dragged out of the EU against our will, and the damage to our economy and public finances has been immense. Can the Minister provide any updates as to what assessment has been made of the impact which Brexit is having upon Scotland's finances, and what steps are being taken to mitigate these impacts? Minister.
I thank Martin Day for this question, and he will have been listening with eagle ears to my colleague just previously, who did a sterling job, Mr Gethens, on outlining the statement of the damage that Brexit has done, continues to do and will do unless we reverse the course. Modelling by the National Institute for Economic and Social Research estimated a 3.2 hit to the UK GDP due to Brexit in 2025, which is estimated to increase to 5.7 by 2035. And indeed, to the right here on the Labour benches, they have had less of a Conservative input into the debate today. In Scotland, this equates to a cut in public revenues of around £3 billion in 25. Similarly, the UK's fiscal watchdog, the OBR, estimate that the trade and cooperation agreement will reduce long-term productivity by 4% relative to remaining in the EU because of all non-tariff barriers on UK-EU trade. We will continue to take a responsibility approach to manage the public finances, prioritising investment in frontline services, and we are focused on delivering the things that matter most to the people of Scotland.
Daniel Johnson to be followed by Jackie Dunbar. Daniel Johnson.
Further to Laura Moodie's question, we're in the middle of a housing emergency, and yet we have a housing underspend of £98 million. That's 13% of what was budgeted in the budget in 24-25. Or the equivalent of over 1,000 homes, given the number of homes that the government hoped to build with that. And given that housing completions have dipped below 20,000, what is the Minister's explanation for that shortfall, given the context of the housing emergency?
Minister.
I thank Mr Johnson for the question. When it comes to housing, 75 in capital, which is mainly driven by the programme timing changes and demand-led constraints in capital programmes, particularly on energy efficiency and cladding, as we just heard. This government has prioritised the housing emergency and will continue to do so. And he should look within his own UK government at the progress that Labour has made at housing, both in the UK and across Scotland, before he points the finger.
Jackie Dunbar, to be followed by Lorna Slater. Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Labour's national insurance hike continues to place huge pressures on the budgets of our public services, costing them an estimated £400 million per year. I find it unacceptable that our public services are paying the price for this Westminster stealth tax. Will the Minister join me in calling on the Labour UK Government once again to fully compensate our public services for this tax hike, so that they can continue to deliver the high-quality services that folk in Scotland deserve?
Minister.
I thank the member for the question. The UK Government has failed to provide full funding for the additional costs of its increase in employer national insurance contributions, which we estimate would cost the public services in Scotland more than £700 million. We have repeatedly, 700, not 400, we have repeatedly called on the UK Government to fund these costs in full, but they fail to do so. And I would really appreciate if my colleagues in the Labour benches are able to help me call for that. The additional funding provided last year by the Treasury of £339 million fell far short of this and left the public services in Scotland, such as GPs, dentists, social care and universities, facing a shortfall. Unless the UK Government changes course, this is an ongoing and additional cost to public services in Scotland that we absolutely do not need.
Lorna Slater, to be followed by Jenny Minto. Lorna Slater.
I'm grateful to the Minister for highlighting the impact of green policies such as free bus travel and free school meals. The Scottish Greens have always maintained that progressive public services should be underpinned by sustainable and fair sources of revenue, which is why we've consistently supported changes to Scotland's income tax regime. Given the increase in net income tax position, does the Minister agree that Scotland's progressive approach to taxation has been an important factor in strengthening the public finances that help fund these investments?
Minister.
I thank Ms Slater for the opportunity to absolutely reinforce her question and statement. There is a majority in this Parliament that has been returned on a mandate for progressive tax policy. The benches are full of us. And I think it's also worth stating that the ask in this country is great, but the offer is even greater. Free tuition fees, free prescription fees. There is the baby box, the child payment, which the UK Government has followed suit of us. Free travel, free bus travel, free inter-island ferry travel for under 22s. The ask is great, but the offer is greater. So I absolutely agree with Ms Slater on her statement.
Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for her statement in putting business, hope and ambition for all of Scotland, especially rural and island areas like Argyll and Bute, at its heart. And I note her comments around the Faroe Islands. I am sure the Minister will agree that, given the challenging Scottish budget settlement and the economic circumstances, that there is a clear case for Scotland to have additional fiscal flexibilities to better manage our budget. And does the Minister agree that Scotland would be far better placed to manage the public finances with the full powers of independence?
Minister.
I thank Ms Minto for her question. Look, I'm a member of the SNP. Of course, I think that Scotland should be able to free both hands from behind its back and manage its finances, its affairs, in the way that any normal country does. With experience and living in the Nordics for many years and working in the Baltic states, I see what small, independent, sovereign nation-states are able to do when both hands are freed. Like I said, the Faroe Islands, 50,000 50,000 of a population, and they have more autonomy than Scotland. We've had a decade of chaos. A decade and more of chaos, actually. The financial crash, followed by austerity, Brexit, the pandemic, all of which the UK government, on both sides of this chamber, representatives in Westminster, have failed to manage. And yet what we have here is stability, reliability and a focus to take decisions on hope, ambition and business growth. So do I think that we should be doing more of that? As my good friend yesterday, Paul Swinney, said, should we have more devolution? I think so.
The next item of business is a statement by Shirley Ann Somerville on Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan Annual Progress Report 2025 to 26. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of the statement, and there should therefore be no interventions or interruptions. I'll allow the front benches to take their place. I call on Shirley Ann Somerville.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government today has published the latest annual progress report on child poverty. This report provides an update on progress towards Scotland's ambitious child poverty targets and in implementing our second Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, Best Start Bright Futures. As the final report against that delivery plan, not only does it set out the wide-ranging action taken in the past year, it also offers a moment of reflection on all that has been achieved in the last 4 years and since the Scottish Parliament set in statute a shared ambition to tackle the scourge of child poverty from our country in 2017. Turning first to progress against the targets, the latest child poverty data published in March reflected recent action by the Department of Work and Pensions to improve poverty statistics from 2020 onwards. This includes making a link to benefits data so that statistics more accurately account for income from social security. This latest data showed that 21% of Scottish children were living in relative poverty in 2024-25, with rates having been revised to 16% in 23-24, the year of Scotland's interim target, and standing substantially below the UK average. It's important to note that DWP will continue to make changes to poverty statistics in the coming years. And while this creates uncertainty in the short term, it will help all of us to get a clearer picture of poverty and the impact of our action in Scotland once their work is complete. Looking next to delivery in 25-26 against a cost of living crisis, continued Westminster austerity and a volatile international situation, the Scottish Government invested over £3.1 billion in support targeted at low-income households last year, with spend benefiting children rising to almost £1.5 billion. This means spend targeted towards children is almost 3 times higher than it was in 28-19, having risen by more than £960 million each year over that time. This has enabled ongoing investment in key measures like our Scottish Child Payment, which is estimated to keep 50,000 children out of relative poverty this year. It has allowed us to make free school meals available to over 360,000 pupils, saving £450 a year for families who take them every day. And it has allowed us to mitigate the UK Government's benefit cap, which has the potential to support over 9,000 children. It has also allowed us to go even further. It includes launching our £3 million Bright Start Breakfast Fund, which has created almost 9,000 Breakfast Club places and provides firm foundations for our new National Breakfast Club offer. We doubled housing acquisition funding to £80 million in a move estimated to take between 60 and 80 children out of temporary accommodation. We further empowered our partners by expanding our fairer funding approach, given 51 third sector organisations multi-year funding to deliver essential services and action on child poverty. And because the UK Government made the long overdue decision to scrap the 2-child limit, we reinvested money previously committed to mitigation to provide immediate support to families struggling with the cost of living over the winter months. As a result of our continued focus on delivery and prioritisation of action on child poverty, the report published today details nearly 100 actions which have been completed or are delivering at scale since 2022. This includes more than doubling the value of the Scottish Child Payment and expanding the payment to all eligible children under the age of 16, further expanding the provision of free school meals and investing in our Extra Time partnership with the Scottish Football Association, providing free breakfast and after-school and holiday club places for around 5,000 children. This action, which is making a real difference to families day in, day out, is improving their lives and their outcomes. I cannot speak of the past year without acknowledging publication of the UK Government's delayed child poverty strategy. And while this included the long overdue decision to end the two-child limit, which has lifted a weight from the shoulders of families across Scotland, overall the strategy represents a missed opportunity to deliver action at the scale needed. With the conscious decisions to keep the benefit cap and to continue the freeze to local housing allowance rates, the UK Government is knowingly continuing to push thousands into poverty. So we will continue to mitigate these cuts for families, investing over £159 million this year to do just that. But we should not have to paper over the cracks left by UK Government policies. And that is why we will continue to push for UK ministers to scrap their proposed cuts to the universal credit health element, scrap the benefit cap, end austerity and work in close partnership with us to match our ambition and investment, and most importantly, our ambition. And we are ambitious. In March, I updated members in this chamber on our plans to drive further progress on child poverty in Scotland through our new delivery plan, bringing hope and building futures. Since then, we have wasted no time in taking forward the actions we were committed to. In just a few months, we have allocated £19 million to local employability partnerships and regional transport partnerships to help improve the availability and affordability of transport for parents and tackle the barriers to work, enabling a wide range of ambitious action which responds to local need. We have launched our Whole Family Support Third Sector Delivery Fund, receiving over 80 ambitious bids from third sector organisations and partnerships, seeking to deliver new and enhanced support for families. These bids are now being assessed, and we will update on the awards in the coming weeks. And we've made a further £8.7 million in discretionary housing payments available to local authorities to help mitigate the impact of the UK Government's local housing allowance freeze, action which is forecast to benefit up to 31,000 children this year, with families already seeing the benefit of this support. Our delivery plan commits to substantive action over the life of this Parliament, from our multi-year funding commitment to devolved employability services and delivering a new national breakfast club offer, and to investing a record £4.1 billion over the next 4 years as part of a wider investment of up to £4.9 billion in affordable homes. Together with the steps we have taken to date, policies in our delivery plan are estimated to keep 100,000 children out of relative poverty this year. But we are not stopping there, and we have heard loud and clear that the call that further action is needed, and that is exactly what we are committed to. The Government has come back refreshed and even more determined to deliver for families, and that's why we've committed to taking forward plans to ensure essential food in our supermarkets is affordable, to introduce a £2 nationwide cap on bus fares to lower the cost of people's commute, delivering on more apprenticeships, to commencing a review of employability services within the first 100 days of this Parliament. And critically, we have also committed to delivering a transformational national expansion of childcare support to every child in our country from 9 months old to the end of primary school by the end of this Parliament. Presiding Officer, over the past 8 years, this Government has delivered life-changing policies, which is why child poverty in Scotland is lower than the UK average. In that time, our evidence base has grown, in large part thanks to the families and partners who we have worked with. We have heard and responded to calls from families, child poverty stakeholders, the Poverty and Inequality Commission, opposition parties and many others. These included calls to expand and improve access to childcare, deliver holistic family support, secure funding for the third sector and tackle public debt. We have taken action that is making and will continue to make a real difference to families. However, many of these policies that we are investing in aren't captured in our income-based targets. Now, this can lead to the debate and calls for action being skewed towards increasing social security, even when other policies lead to direct savings for families or drive systemic change across our public services. Presiding Officer, that is why I am confirming today our intention to undertake a review of the type of targets we use to measure our impact on child poverty. We need to review the targets to ensure our approach is grounded in the best available evidence, continues to drive the right actions and supports sustained long-term progress for children and families. We need to know what makes the most difference for families. Now, the review will enable us to use the considerable evidence we have generated and work with partners to explore how we can use targets to drive focus and action where it is most needed, to take a balanced approach which focuses on prevention, immediate support and longer-term outcomes that are right for families. And I look forward to working constructively with members from across the Chamber to inform this review. Presiding Officer, this Government remains unequivocally committed to eradicating child poverty and to driving meaningful change for families. Our action to date, our new delivery plan published in March, and the ambitious commitments on which this Government was elected are a testament to that. We've already made great progress in Scotland and we will continue to go further so that no child's life is limited by poverty. And supporting families with the cost of living and eradicating child poverty will be the defining mission of this Government, and we are committed to working across the Chamber and across Scotland to deliver on our shared mission. Thank you.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in the statement. I intend to allow 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. Members who wish to ask a question should press their request to speak buttons now. Both questions and answers should be brief. Thomas Kerr to be followed by Mark Griffin. Thomas Kerr.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement and for the published report, which I'm sure will make some very interesting summer reading. And with that, can I say I welcome this announcement on the review on how we measure child poverty, and while I wait to see the detail, I will work constructively with her on that. But it is there that I'm afraid the consensus currently ends, because I believe the best route out of poverty isn't a handout, but a hand up with work. And that's why this statement won't cut it. So I have an idea that the Cabinet Secretary could sign up to immediately that will support plenty of hard-working parents, many of whom are in work but remain in poverty, and that is to cut tax. So let me ask the Cabinet Secretary, will the SNP finally put their money where their mouth is and make work pay to cut tax and ensure we tackle child poverty and in-work poverty, which has ripped across Scotland's forgotten working class communities for far too long?
Minister.
Well, unsurprisingly, Presiding Officer, I don't agree with Mr Kerr's assessment of the problem or his suggested solution. We have a progressive tax system in Scotland. We've just heard about that from my colleague Hannah Mary Goodlad in the previous statement. That allows us to deliver public services here in Scotland that are not available in the rest of the UK. And that is something where we do ask those on higher incomes, not lower and lower incomes, to be more taxed. They also benefit, of course, from some of the public services that are universally available. So it is important that we look at what's available to those on low income and also recognise that other people are struggling. And of course we do that by having such things as free tuition, free prescriptions and those aspects that are available to all. So we will of course continue to target our response to those in child poverty, while never forgetting that there are others who are also finding the cost of living difficult.
Mark Griffin to be followed by Heather Anderson. Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Driving down child poverty is a key priority of this Government and I think of the Parliament as a whole. But reviewing the targets the Government's failing to hit doesn't seem to meet that rhetoric. The Scottish Government's own impact assessment of the Child Poverty Delivery Plan says that it won't meet the targets. Key campaigners in the child poverty sector, including the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Save the Children, say that the plan might not even be lawful. So can the Cabinet Secretary say when a revised child poverty delivery plan, which actually meets the Government's own statutory responsibilities, will be published?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Government doesn't intend to publish another child poverty delivery plan. I know that the targets that we have currently for 2030 are challenging, and we are determined to meet those targets. We are content that there is a credible path to do so, despite everything that's happening in the rest of the UK and in international situations. But I go back to the point that this is a review of the type of targets. We are in a situation just now where funded early learning and childcare and school-age childcare doesn't have a direct impact on targets, and therefore the impact of that on families isn't counted. Our whole family wellbeing funding programme, which is about disrupting and breaking the cycle of poverty, so we're changing systemic and intergenerational poverty, is not measured as part of an income-based target. We've got aspects around school meal debt, where the government invested nearly £2.9 million, that again does not impact on our income-based targets. So we have targets, which I think has driven the focus and driven delivery, but at this point it is important to reflect on the investment the government is making on areas that don't impact directly on the target. And I think it's sensible that we take a step back, look at what we are measuring to ensure that we are doing this correctly and measuring the impact on people. But I can assure the Chamber that as we continue with this review starting in the summer, that does not distract the government from the delivery of the expansion in childcare, the £2 bus cap and the other measures which I mentioned in my statement.
Heather Anderson, to be followed by Holly Bruce. Heather Anderson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests and declare I'm a serving councillor, Dundee City Council. During the last parliamentary term, families in Dundee benefited from the Scottish Government-funded Pathfinder initiative. This whole family support approach ensured that the families struggling with poverty-related issues were at the heart of decision-making and given the opportunity to contribute towards finding a solution that worked for them. Over 1,200 people engaged with the programme, over 180 families increased their employability opportunities and directly benefited 250 children. The pilot's so successful, it's actually leading to systemic change in the way we provide services in Dundee, with a whole family-based approach now being embedded in the way we'll work with families going forward. So I was very excited to hear about your announcement about the whole family support.
The member ask a question, please.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'd like to hear more about how you are going to develop whole family support as an approach to eradicating child poverty.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I had the pleasure of visiting the Whole Family Support Project in Dundee in the last session, and it is making a real difference to families, and that's exactly why we're continuing to invest in our Fairer Futures partnerships and the whole family wellbeing funded programmes, working with local authorities, and why we have the new Whole Family Support Third Sector Delivery Fund, which I mentioned in my statement. And it's this type of work that delivers systemic change, lifts family out of intergenerational poverty, that is so key to tackling poverty in the longer term. And that's why one of the examples that I would give into why we do need to have a review of the type of targets that we have, because that £154.5 million that is invested from 25-26 isn't directly part of the targeted work when we're measuring targets. And I think that points to one of the failings that we have in the system and something we can improve on.
Holly Bruce, to be followed by Megan Gallagher. Holly Bruce.
I refer to my register of interest as a member of Glasgow City Council. The Cabinet Secretary has told us that the current targets mean action can be skewed towards social security. But social security increases are one of the few approaches that actually work, with the child payment bringing 50,000 children out of poverty, as the Cabinet Secretary has said herself. Child poverty charities are united in arguing that £55 Scottish child payment is absolutely essential if we are to come anywhere close to meeting our targets. Can the Cabinet Secretary assure us that changes to the targets will not compromise work to boost family incomes, and that the £55 Scottish child payment proposal should be given urgent consideration?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I'm very proud of the work we've done in social security, and I do absolutely recognise that it has had a direct impact in lifting children out of poverty, and Holly Bruce mentions the 50,000 children. That is exceptionally important, and I am a firm believer that social security should be done in a dignity, fairness and respect approach and a human rights approach. But we cannot just talk about social security. We need to also talk about the childcare that families require, the assistance to get into employment, the barriers to getting into employment, whether that's through transport or childcare elsewhere. We need to have a rounded conversation. Social security will continue to be an important part of that, but it cannot be the only aspect that we talk about. And that's why I would encourage campaigners, yes, of course they will continue to press the government to increase the Scottish Child Payment still further, but I would also encourage them to assist with the review that we're taking on the types of targets and the other wider approaches to tackling poverty that are also important.
Megan Gallagher to be followed by Morven May McCallum. Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Cabinet Secretary mentioned in her statement, the Scottish Government has spent billions of pounds to tackle this issue, but child poverty remains stubbornly high, with 1 in 5 children still living in relative poverty. With 22% of working-age adults economically inactive, more needs to be done to get families out of poverty through long-term employment and job opportunities. We need to get Scotland working again. So will the Cabinet Secretary look at investing in employability services, and will she also look at the ballooning benefits bill, which is unsustainable? And if we're really serious about getting Scotland working again, we need to cut that bill in order to do it.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'll give one example of how cutting people's benefits doesn't help, and that's some of the suggestions that we take away support from disabled people, which actually disabled people tell us helps them into employment and supports them into employment, Presiding Officer, and I think we need to bear that in mind. And I would point the member to what's both in the plan that we announced before the election and the other work that's been contained in my statement. For example, the RISE initiative that Colleges Scotland worked on with the government and proposed with the government, where we're actually increasing people's skills but also looking at some of the barriers to employment. The £90 million that is there in employability schemes that is now there on a multi-year basis to ensure we're getting the maximum effect out of that. The work that is going in to directly help parents into jobs. And indeed, I went to Fife Gingerbread this morning, where I spoke to families and I spoke to their support workers about the work that Fife Gingerbread and others do to ensure that women are supported into employment in a way that encourages their confidence, builds their skills and is very sustainable and successful in the long term.
Morven May McCallum to be followed by Bob Doris. Morven May McCallum.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to declare that I'm a councillor for the Highland Council. In the Highlands and Islands, poverty goes far beyond the material. When a child grows up, watching future opportunities being curtailed, seeing their siblings and friends move away for a more prosperous life in the city, the quiet lesson they learn is that success means moving away from the areas they love. This evokes a poverty of opportunity. This is one of the many reasons why 1 in 5 children in my region are in poverty. Depopulation hollows out communities and it narrows the horizons of young people. So can I please ask the Cabinet Secretary to expand on what the Scottish Government is doing to improve opportunities for ambitious young people in rural communities? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think Morven May McCallum raises a very important point, and that's to ensure that the government, councils and others look at the challenge of poverty and ensure that our solutions meet the needs in all parts of Scotland. And that will be very different in a city centre here in the Central Belt compared to the Highlands and Islands. And I think that's exceptionally important. Clearly, she'll be aware of the work that the government has undertaken and continues to undertake around depopulation and supporting population into the Highlands and Islands and encouraging those in the Highlands and Islands to stay. And I would be delighted to be able to continue that discussion with her after today, and I'm sure other members would, other ministers will as well, as she raises a very important point about ensuring as we move forward with our review that we have a rural and island lens to those challenges as well. So I thank her for raising it today.
Bob Doris to be followed by Jenny Minto. Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, I acknowledge the ambitious Scottish Government targets to reduce child poverty and the progress made, but given we've heard there's going to be a review of those targets, it would be helpful to where the Cabinet Secretary believes those targets have actually driven delivery in tackling child poverty in itself. But also targets can of course be blown off course by actions by others, including of course the UK Government? Perhaps the Cabinet Secretary can say a little bit more about that. But also, how can the Scottish Government seek to work constructively, despite what I've said, with the UK Government to make common cause to tackle child poverty here in Scotland? Cabinet Secretary.
The targets have been an exceptionally important part of the Government's work since the Act was passed in 2017. They have driven focus, they have driven delivery, and I think it was an exceptionally important part of our armoury as we've moved forward with tackling child poverty here in Scotland, and we are seeing that difference being made. Mr Doris is quite right to point to the fact that we're not the only actor in this situation, and the impact of the UK Government can be extremely detrimental. I mentioned the freeze in local housing allowance, the continuation of the benefit cap and so on. I was disappointed at the lack of genuine work as the UK Government delivered their child poverty strategy on a four nations basis. I do hope we can do better in this session, and I do hope that we can meet to be able to discuss that on a four nations basis soon. And I also note with interest the very interesting policy proposals that are coming forward from the new Welsh Government in this area, and I also look forward to working with my Plaid Cymru colleagues on the child poverty agenda.
Jenny Minto, to follow by Joe Fagan.
And I listened very carefully to your response to Marvin May McCallum, because my question's in a similar area. Inspire Alba works with those most vulnerable across Argyll and Buttes rural and island communities. Some of those communities have been groundbreaking in creating different conditions for community wellbeing. For example, the communities in Gia, Tidey and Glenbar. There are examples of community energy which have reinvigorated rural communities and invested in local solutions that reduce inequalities and ensure better outcomes for children and young people. Less than 1% of Scotland's energy is in community or local authority ownership. So how do we join the dots between economic policies, just transition and child poverty to ensure a robust and sustainable future for all our children and young people for now and future generations?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And the aspects to Jenny Minto's questions that highlight again the real need requirement for all of us to ensure that our child poverty mission also fits exceptionally well with our work on climate action, and also to ensure that we are delivering good green economic growth. These things are linked entirely. There are really powerful examples where this can make a difference, and where power has been put in the hands of communities, where they are designing solutions that are right for the people and the families that live there. Ms Minto raises one example of Inspire Alba. Members will have other opportunities that they have seen in their own constituencies. Some of those opportunities have been able to be taken up, particularly because of the Community and Renewable Energy scheme from the Scottish Government. But we need to go further on community ownership of renewable energy projects, and ministers will be very keen to work with Ms Minto and others as we take forward that work.
Joe Fagan, to be followed by Patricia Gibson.
Thank you. My register of interest will show that I'm a councillor in South Lanarkshire. According to COSLA, for every £1 spent on local authority welfare rights and money advice services, there is a financial gain of £13 to the people those services support. So given the importance of partnership with local government and the great unrealised potential of a shift to preventative spending, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that a return to the core funding cuts to councils implied by the medium-term financial strategy should be ruled out?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't recognise Mr Fagan's description of the situation financially with local government at the moment. I do recognise that we are all doing our best with the budgets that we have, and indeed I met actually with COSLA representatives yesterday to talk about housing and also to talk about how we can work collectively on child poverty. And he mentioned preventative spend, and I think that's a very important area where Scottish Government and local authorities can work together on with third sector partners. To me, that is public service reform in action, ensuring that we have public services that deliver better, more efficiently, more effectively, and therefore better for the client involved as well. He gave some examples of that around debt and welfare advice. There are many more, Presiding Officer, but that preventative spend is why I look forward to working with Ivan McKee on the public service reform agenda, because that will deliver for our constituents.
Thank you. Patricia Gibson, followed by Kayleigh Kinross-O'Neill.
Presiding Officer, I very much welcome the extensive package of measures put in place by the Scottish Government to tackle child poverty, as well as the allocation of £19 million for local employability partnerships and regional transport partnerships to help remove barriers to work. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what more the Scottish Government can do to boost the take-up of employability programmes, especially for those furthest away from work who may also require support in building soft skills?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it's the types of examples that I actually saw again this morning in the visit that I did to Fife Gingerbread, and I've seen many examples of this, because we do know that fair work offers a sustainable route out of poverty for many families. It's obviously key to our approach in eradicating child poverty. That's why we're working closely with local employability partnerships to strengthen the employment offer for parents and families, and it's why we're working with third sector partners like Fife Gingerbread to ensure that the confidence skills, and I heard very clearly both from the mums there and their support workers about the real difference it can make to have a woman coming through the door that's perhaps not been in employment for some time as she's raised her family, but then has been given the confidence by the support workers and by other mums to then lead on to developing skills and on to successful employment. And I think it was a fantastic example that there should be more of, and that's what the Government is determined to support, both in the third sector and through our local authority colleagues.
Thank you. Kayleigh Kinross-O'Neill, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also refer to my register of interests as a City of Edinburgh councillor. Cabinet Secretary, families excluded from social security support due to immigration status are especially at risk of poverty. The Child Poverty Action identified that local authority powers under Section 2 of the Children Scotland Act can be used to provide cash payments to these families without contravening no recourse to public funds. Scottish Greens made the same call during the recent election. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to provide guidance to all local authorities to deliver these payments, at least equivalent to the Scottish Child Payment, to children whose families are in this position?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it is very important that we're exceptionally careful about any programme that is put in place with those that have no recourse to public funds, because the last thing, the vast majority of us would want to do would be to damage anyone's immigration status and their journey through the immigration system. There are limitations to what can be done. The UK Government sets the rules about what can and cannot be given in terms of social security. So, for example, we can't give the Scottish Child Payment to families in that order, but we do work with third sector partners to investigate what we can do, because destitution is an issue here in Scotland because of the failing parts of the immigration system that does see people drawn into destitution, and that's something which we are working with the British Red Cross and others to ensure that there is support that can be provided within the powers and the limitations that we have at this time.
And Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's thanks to the ambition of our SNP government and the action it has taken on child poverty that child poverty rates in Scotland stand substantially lower than UK levels. However, it is appalling that the Scottish Government is still having to spend money mitigating the UK Government's lack of action. Can the Cabinet Secretary update Parliament on the impact long-standing UK Government policies like the bedroom tax, benefit cap and local housing allowance freeze have all had on Scotland's progress towards ending child poverty?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government will spend £159 million to mitigate this year through discretionary housing payments in the Scottish Welfare Fund. The benefit cap, for example, which the UK Government chose to keep in place, impacts on 9,000 children, with many more families expected to be hit by the cap following the scrapping of the two-child limit. Much was made of that by the UK Labour Government, but they actually then hit those families with the benefit cap instead. We will mitigate and assist those 9,000 children. Over 19,000 children are impacted by the bedroom tax, while the freeze to local housing allowance rates will impact on an estimated 26,000 children this year. The Scottish Government will continue to step in, support those children and support those families, but the best way that this can be tackled is at source, and for the UK Government to change their position on the benefit cap and to stop the freeze on the local housing allowance.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. We now move to decision times. There are no questions to be put as a result of today's business, so that concludes decision time. We'll now move on to members' business and ask members who are leaving the chamber to please do so quietly.